Hey, what's up? It's cute what if? This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku was Japan's secret vigilante. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. And here we go again, Izuku thought to himself, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. His mother quickly interrupted his thoughts, reminding him not to use bad language. He apologized, correcting himself to say, "Good morning." She gave him a stern look, but he could see a hint of a smile. Over the past few years, Izuku had developed a habit of speaking his mind, a tendency that had started in 4th grade. Back then, he didn't know many inappropriate words, but that changed when Kaken introduced him to a colorful vocabulary. His teachers were surprised by the sudden shift in his behavior, attributing it to Kaken's influence. In an attempt to curb his swearing, his mother took him out of school, but that only made things worse. Discovering the internet at the age of 10 exposed him to even more bad language. Now, 5 years later, nothing had changed. He didn't attend school, he no longer saw Kaken, and he chose to stay at home. Unfortunately, his inability to keep quiet often landed him in trouble. "I'm working on it," he thought innocently, shrugging as he headed for the door. "Where do you think you're going?" his mother asked. "To annoy some pro-heroes by doing their job better than they can," he replied, putting on his mask. His mother stared at him for a moment before giving him a small smile. "Be back before dinner." "Will do," he said, stepping outside. Izuku used his quirk to propel himself to the tops of buildings, scanning for any signs of trouble. His quirk was a unique blend of his parents' abilities, telekinesis and fire breathing. He had mastered both, surpassing his parents in control and strength. While his mother could lift small objects, he could manipulate people and more, and while his father could start a small campfire, Izuku could ignite multiple buildings. As he continued his search, he spotted the one and only Endeavor. A grin spread across his face as he jumped off the building and landed beside the pro-hero. "How's it going, NG?" he asked casually, but the man didn't even flinch. "Darn villain," Endeavor grumbled. "Last I checked, I was considered Japan's savior," Izuku reminded him, noticing the vein throbbing on Endeavor's forehead. "Admit it, NG, life without me would be boring," he teased, dodging a punch aimed at him. "Go to hell," Endeavor shouted, unleashing a blast of fire. Izuku rolled to the side to avoid the flames and used his telekinesis to throw dirt into Endeavor's eyes, smiling at his frustration. "NG, it's been fun, but I have to go," he announced, turning to leave when a massive explosion caught his attention. "You've got to be kidding me," he groaned, running toward the sound. As he got closer, he saw a large crowd gathered around a scene filled with fire and explosions. He lifted himself to the nearest building and landed on the roof, where he could see everything clearly. A strange dark green sludge surrounded by flames was visible, and he noticed a kid around his age trapped inside it. Lowering himself to the ground, he approached the pro-heroes who were holding the crowd back but not taking action. "Aren't you guys going to do anything?" he yelled. They ignored him, continuing to watch the chaos unfold. "Well," he insisted. "We're waiting for backup, our quirks aren't suited for this," one of them replied. "That's nonsense," he thought, charging toward the sludge. Focusing his telekinesis, he pulled the kid from the sludge and tossed him toward the heroes, hoping they would catch him. The sludge villain yelled in surprise as Izuku took a deep breath and pulled down his mask. Fire erupted from his mouth, melting the villain into a slimy puddle. He quickly found a plastic bottle and contained the remains, saving both the people and the environment. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. He nodded in acknowledgement before turning to the so-called heroes. "That's how you do it," he said, glaring at them. "Our quirks aren't suited for this, my foot." Their faces turned red as he realized he had just done their job for them illegally, but that was beside the point. He scanned the area for the boy he had saved and got a good look at him. Blonde hair, poor posture, red eyes, and a permanent scowl on his face. "Well, this is interesting," he thought. Suddenly, the boy reacted, surprised by Izuku's presence. "Reckless kid, be careful next time," Izuku remarked. "Say that to my face," the boy shouted back. Izuku turned around and playfully flipped him off, saying, "Look at that, my middle finger likes you, before walking away. Later, as he returned home, his mother confronted him. "Izuku, what were you thinking?" "Hey, Mom," he replied, trying to avoid the question. "Don't blame me. You could have died," she exclaimed. "But I didn't," he said, removing his mask. She crossed her arms and shook her head. "Just promise me you'll try to be more careful." He sighed and nodded. "I promise." "Good," she said, turning toward the kitchen. Izuku headed upstairs to his room and lay on his bed. It felt strange to see Kaken again after so many years, and the fact that he hadn't changed at all was amusing. He wondered if Kaken would try to get into UA. He suddenly realized he hadn't thought about UA in years. With his quirk, he could definitely get in if only he hadn't been using it for vigilante work. He had never given up on wanting to be a hero, but the dream had faded over time. Still, he was doing what he had always wanted, saving people and becoming someone others could rely on. A hero license would be nice, too, as it would help him deal with the pro heroes who often got in his way like Endeavor. He couldn't help but wonder if Kaken recognized him. As if he could remember, it had been 5 years, and the thought saddened him. It would be better if he did remember. He got up and crawled out of his window to the roof, then headed toward the city. This vigilante was becoming a nuisance. While he did good and helped out whenever he could, he was also a pain. They knew nothing about him except for what they assumed was his quirk. Aizawa had met him a few times and saw nothing wrong with his actions, but the way he made heroes look bad made him a threat. The vigilante seemed to know everything about every hero, their quirks, their weaknesses, how to defeat them, and even their real names. He called Endeavor by his first name, Enji, just to provoke him. Everyone knew Endeavor's real name, but no one was brave enough to use it except this guy. Tsukachi walked past Aizawa's office, announcing he was heading out. Aizawa nodded and decided to go on patrol since he wouldn't find any leads on the vigilante there. As usual, there was nothing but a few petty thieves. After a few minutes of scaling the roofs, he spotted someone sitting on a rooftop, smoke wafting from his mouth. That couldn't be good. Aizawa moved closer to get a better look. The boy appeared plain, around 15 or 16, with bushy green hair and black roots. He wasn't smoking, but it still wasn't safe up there. Aizawa called out to the kid, asking what he was doing. The boy looked him up and down, then turned away as if Aizawa wasn't there. He replied that it was nothing that concerned Aizawa, as if they were old friends. When Aizawa mentioned his name, the boy straightened up, realizing his mistake and muttering to himself. He pulled something from his pocket and put it on his face before standing to face Aizawa. He mentioned that Aizawa had caught him at a bad time, which made Aizawa uneasy. The boy continued, saying he didn't think he had ever told Aizawa his name. Aizawa pointed out that he had never mentioned how he knew Aizawa's name either. Ignoring Aizawa's question, the boy introduced himself as Deku, expressing his annoyance at Endeavor calling him a villain and imitating the hero's tone, laughing afterward. After a moment, he looked at Aizawa and said he was lucky, as he was the first to know his name and the first to get close to capturing him. Aizawa realized with a start that this was the vigilante he had been hunting for months. As he approached, the boy blew smoke into Aizawa's eyes, causing him to rub them in irritation. The boy mumbled an apology before running away. Aizawa reached into his pocket for eye drops, muttering Deku's name. That encounter had been too close. Aizawa felt a twinge of guilt for the smoke but reminded himself it was the boy's fault for not wearing goggles. He hoped Deku hadn't gotten a good look at his face in the dark. Back at home, he climbed through his window. He wondered if what he did to Aizawa was self-defense. Most of the time, when he got into fights, it was in self-defense, like with Endeavor earlier that day. If what happened with Aizawa wasn't self-defense, then the only crime he had committed was blowing smoke into a man's eyes. Speaking of smoke, he began to cough. What he did to save Kaken had pushed his limits. Even though his quirks were strong, extending them too far came with painful drawbacks. He could set 3 buildings on fire, though he preferred not to discuss how he knew that, but attacking someone with fire for an extended PRD was challenging. Starting a fire in a building was easy, all it took was a small spark and the whole structure would ignite. As for the drawbacks, using his fire breathing too much caused him to cough up smoke, leading to further coughing fits, which he tried to avoid. His telekinesis, on the other hand, gave him migraines, but he was used to it now and could use it longer than he could a few months ago before the pain became unbearable. He continued coughing until his mother heard him and rushed upstairs. She asked if he was okay, and he reassured her, though he was still coughing. She guided him outside, where he coughed for another 10 minutes before slowly calming down. His mother remarked that it was worse than last time, and he explained that he had used his quirk more to take out a slime creature. She expressed concern, noting that it had never been this bad for his father. He promised to be more careful next time, though she clearly didn't believe him. Later, Yamahata entered Aizawa's office, excitedly mentioning he had heard about the encounter with the vigilante. Aizawa, not looking up from his computer, responded that he had indeed run into him. Yamahata pressed for details, eager to hear about the vigilante. Aizawa sighed and turned away from the screen, wondering what there was to say. He had met the boy by accident on a roof, thinking he was smoking. He shared his name and then blew smoke in my direction before running off. I turned back to the computer. He asked if it was his real name or a code name, and I replied that it was a code name. The room fell silent again, and he yelled for me to tell him what it was. I unplugged my ears and told him it was Deku. He seemed surprised and leaned back in his chair, commenting on how strange the name was, given what he had heard about him. I suggested there was probably a backstory to it and changed the subject. He then asked if I had ever gotten my eyes checked, to which I replied that the burning sensation had gone away after a minute. He fell silent again before asking what I thought of Deku. I grumbled about his endless questions and finally admitted that he was interesting. I noted that he wasn't doing anything wrong besides using his quirk without a license, and he seemed to have good intentions. I recalled last night when I first saw Deku, I had thought he was a teenager. Suddenly, I jumped out of my seat, startling Yamahata and causing him to fall out of his chair. He looked up at me, confused. I explained that when I first saw Deku, I thought he was a teenager, but when he noticed me, he put on his mask, which made me forget. This realization led me to conclude that he might actually be a teenager. Yamahata stared at me for a moment before exclaiming that I needed to tell Nizu about this. I agreed and grabbed him by the ear, insisting he come with me. I used my telekinesis to smash the alarm clock against the wall, expressing my disdain for mornings. Checking my phone, I realized I disliked afternoons just as much. After setting my phone aside, I got out of bed and rubbed the sleep from my eyes, noticing my room was covered in gray ash. I sighed, frustrated that I had just cleaned a few days ago. After tidying up, I decided to go out and patrol since I had nothing else to do. I found my costume and mask, which I hadn't worn lately due to my laziness. I had worked hard on it, and I didn't want to let all those hours go to waste. The outfit was a black suit with red cuffs, white stripes, and a hood. The sleeves were cut short to prevent catching fire, and my mask covered the lower half of my face. My shoes were bright red with black laces. Once dressed, I hopped out of my window, eager to begin my patrol. However, my plans quickly changed when Aizawa yelled for me to stop. I decided to keep running, playfully responding that I would pass on his offer. We engaged in a game of chase for a while until I used my telekinesis to lift myself onto the rooftops. Once on the roof, I spotted Present Mike. I was surprised to see him and greeted him with a laugh. He approached, and as he got close, I blew a wall of smoke at him, causing him to cough as he fell to the ground. I shrugged it off, thinking it wasn't my fault he came to me. Turning around, I found Aizawa blocking my escape. I grumbled about how they made quite the duo, and he captured me in his scarf, telling me not to call them that. I teased him, saying if it annoyed him, I would continue. He told me to shut up, and I responded that life was short, so he should smile while he still had teeth. He reminded me that he had just arrested me, to which I questioned if he really had. I shrugged, indifferent to the situation. Later, I found myself in a conversation where I learned that they wanted me to attend UA and join the hero course in Class 1A. The rat-like figure nodded, confirming the offer. I expressed how it was an opportunity many would desire, but I hesitated, explaining that I struggled with people and hadn't been in school since I was around 9 or 10. When asked why, I shared that I had been a decent kid, but my mother and teachers considered my best friend a bad influence, leading my mother to pull me out of school. The rat suggested that she could have moved me to another school, and I laughed, noting that nothing had really changed. I admitted to having a colorful vocabulary since childhood, which I considered one of my best achievements. The rat stared at me for a moment before proposing that if things didn't work out in the hero class, I could take the hero license exam. I agreed without hesitation. Afterward, I asked if I could continue my vigilante work, to which he replied he didn't see why not. I also requested that he inform the heroes, specifically Endeavor, to leave me alone. He promised to see what he could do. As I left, Aizawa followed me, and I told him this was where we would part ways. He insisted on informing my parent or guardian about the situation, but I said I could handle it. He refused, and I resigned, thinking my mother probably wouldn't believe me anyway. When I arrived home, I opened the door and called for my mother. She responded that she would be there shortly. I walked into the kitchen with Aizawa trailing behind me. After a moment, my mother entered, starting to ask about my patrol before noticing Aizawa. She looked at Izuku and then at Aizawa, her face paling slightly as she asked who he was. Izuku reassured her that everything was fine and took a seat at the table. Aizawa, standing behind Izuku, reminded him that he hadn't forgiven him for the smoke trick he had pulled. Izuku told him to be quiet. Aizawa sighed and approached Izuku's mother, extending his hand and introducing himself. "So, you're Midoriya's mother, correct?" he inquired. She confirmed her identity but ignored his hand. Aizawa continued, explaining that her son had been offered a place at UA High School, specifically in the hero course. He awkwardly withdrew his hand as she looked at Izuku in disbelief. Izuku responded with a wink. "But what about," she started, but Aizawa interrupted, assuring her that they were aware of his vocabulary and the fact that he hadn't been in school for about 5 years. However, they still saw potential in him as a hero. Izuku added that he could still pursue his vigilante work, making it a win-win situation. Her face broke into a smile as she remarked that it was about time he got out of the house. Izuku retorted that she was the one keeping him in it. Later, Izuku questioned the large door, wondering if Aizawa was keeping monsters inside. Aizawa rolled his eyes and instructed him to wait outside until he called him in, mentioning that school had started 2 weeks ago. Izuku was taken aback by this news, but Aizawa ignored him as he entered the classroom. Once inside, Aizawa commanded everyone to be quiet and take their seats. After everyone settled, he announced that there was a new student joining them. He warned the class that this student hadn't been around people his age for 5 years and had an interesting vocabulary. He turned to the door, inviting the new student to come in. Izuku entered, glaring at Aizawa and acknowledging that he had heard what he said. Aizawa had hoped he would. Izuku rolled his eyes and scanned the class until his gaze landed on a certain sleeping blonde. A grin spread across his face as he approached the desk. He stood in front of Bakugo Katsuki, who was sleeping during this not-so-grand entrance. Izuku playfully smacked him on the head, urging him to wake up. The class was taken aback, but Izuku didn't care. He had been waiting for this moment for 5 years. Bakugo looked up, annoyed, but then his expression changed as he recognized Izuku. A huge grin appeared on his face as he got up and hugged him. He pauses, breaks out of the hug, and looks at Midoriya. He asks what Midoriya is doing there. Midoriya replies that he missed him too. Just then, Aizawa appears, looking annoyed. He comments that as touching as the reunion is, Midoriya should introduce himself to the class and explain why he is there. Midoriya walks back to the front of the class and stands next to Aizawa. He introduces himself as Midoriya Izuku, stating that he is there because he is awesome and was recommended by the principal. Aizawa elbows him, prompting a small yelp from Midoriya. Aizawa tells him to quit playing around, and Midoriya asks if anyone has heard about the vigilante who picks fights with heroes while saving people. Practically the entire class nods in response. Midoriya is surprised and turns to Aizawa, expressing his belief that only a few people knew about him. The class reacts with excitement, and Aizawa tells them to calm down. He confirms that Midoriya is indeed the vigilante known as Deku and explains that he got caught by Aizawa himself. Aizawa adds that Midoriya hasn't done anything wrong besides using his quirk without a license. The class is taken aback, and Midoriya adds that it was technically self-defense. Aizawa raises an eyebrow, then sighs, indicating they can discuss it later. He instructs Midoriya to take a seat. Midoriya smiles and sits behind Kaken, who looks over his shoulder and grins. Aizawa comments that anywhere but there would have been preferable. Midoriya explains that he hasn't been in school for 5 years and that Kaken is the only person he knows and feels comfortable around. Aizawa agrees to allow it as long as they don't cause any trouble. When Aizawa turns around and wraps himself in a sleeping bag, Kaken faces Midoriya and warns him not to make promises he can't keep. Midoriya playfully retorts, returning the sentiment. Midoriya notices the rest of the class staring at them and reassures them that he doesn't bite. A blue-haired student with robotic arms approaches and introduces himself as Tenya Ida. Midoriya shakes his hand, and soon other classmates come up to introduce themselves. The questions begin with one student asking if Midoriya is really that vigilante. He confirms it, and when asked why he became one, he replies he had nothing better to do. Curiosity piqued, another student asks about his quirk, to which Midoriya responds that it is confidential. The room falls silent, and he explains that he prefers not to disclose his quirk to people he just met, as one of them could be a villain. A student acknowledges that it makes sense, and Midoriya adds that even the principal doesn't know. When asked how that's possible, Midoriya confidently claims he is just awesome. The class stares at him blankly, and he laughs, assuring them they will get used to it. Another student chastises him for swearing, insisting that he and Kaken need to fix their bad habits immediately. Midoriya pretends to be deep in thought, humorously stating he can't see things from their perspective. The student's face turns red, and Midoriya stands up to pat him on the shoulder, expressing a desire to become friends. The class laughs at the exchange, and Aizawa tells Midoriya to quit it. Midoriya sits back down, feeling that things aren't so bad. The bell rings and the class begins to leave. Aizawa calls for Midoriya to stay behind. Kaken bids him farewell as he exits, and Midoriya glares at the smile on Kaken's face. Aizawa advises him not to pick on Ida too much, as he is a good kid. Midoriya shrugs, stating that if Ida gets upset over a few cuss words, he isn't ready for the real world. Aizawa's lip twitches slightly, and he continues that he wants Midoriya to help the other students, as they need someone down to earth. He reminds Midoriya to be patient with them, as they may say foolish things. Midoriya agrees and walks out. When he arrives home, he calls out to his mother, taking off his shoes. She asks how school was as he enters the kitchen and finds her cooking dinner. He replies that he didn't mind it and that the class doesn't seem too bad. She inquires if he made any friends, and he smiles, mentioning that he reunited with an old one. She stops and turns to him, incredulous. He confirms it, and she asks if he is serious. Midoriya insists he wouldn't lie about it, revealing that the person is in the hero course. His mother expresses surprise, and he adds that the person hasn't changed a bit either. She remains silent and returns to her cooking. He lets out a sigh, thinking that this time, he might be the bad example. She responds with a non-committal sound. He insists that Katsuki isn't a bad person, and she acknowledges this with a sigh. He gets up and heads upstairs to his room. She has never explained why she disapproves of his friendship with Katsuki, but he can guess. It's because Katsuki has transformed her sweet, kind son into someone she hardly recognizes. He knows she loves him, but he also understands that she wishes he had never changed. She wishes he didn't engage in vigilantism, but when she sees how happy it makes him, she lets it slide. She wishes he didn't curse as much. She hopes he will make new friends. She wonders if things would be different if his father were still around. She longs for her old son back, but he knows he cannot return to that version of himself. Midoriya walks out and he wonders if he said too much. From what he knows about Midoriya, he thinks he is a bad example, someone the younger students in the hero course should avoid. He believes the opposite is true. What Midoriya said about Ida resonates with him, and most kids in the class likely think that heroes shouldn't curse so freely. However, many professionals do, not in interviews but during battles. He can't count how many times he has heard All Might curse in the heat of a fight. Midoriya and Bakugo probably learned long ago that heroes are not perfect. He sighs and grabs a few papers from his desk before leaving the room. Upon entering his house, he heads to the couch and stares at the ceiling. He can't figure Midoriya out. He knows he is a good kid, but he feels like a puzzle with a million pieces. He dislikes puzzles. He doesn't even know what Midoriya's quirk is. He recalls Midoriya's words about not wanting to reveal his quirk to strangers, fearing that one of them could be a villain. That's the thing, Midoriya keeps his guard up. He acts carefree as if he has no problems, but he can sense something is bothering him. What could it be? He has no idea. Just to clarify, Midoriya is overthinking things. Inko is a good mother in the manga and anime, and she will be a good mother in this story. She worries, but she doesn't dislike Bakugo. She is simply concerned about her son spending time with him and wants him to meet new people. He finds himself bored on the way to the amusement park that resembles Universal Studios Japan. Everyone else is excited about their new costumes, but he is wearing the same one. It works for him, but he can tell that the support corps students have tampered with it. He doesn't plan on wearing it all the time. In an emergency, he won't worry about his outfit. Unless he needs a support item in the future, he figures he will have to wear it constantly. He notices the girl with the frog quirk next to him and acknowledges her. She expresses her desire to ask him something based on videos she has seen online, asking if it is true that he has 2 quirks. The bus falls silent as he processes this. He realizes that he is avoiding the question, but he would rather let them wonder about it for now. For the rest of the ride, everyone stares at him, except for Katsuki, who already knows about his quirks and seems a bit envious. When they arrive, he hops off the bus and follows the class inside. He comments on the amusement park, noting that it doesn't resemble Universal Studios Japan. Uraraka excitedly points out 13, and he asks if she likes her. Uraraka beams, expressing her admiration for 13's work. 13 begins explaining something, but he is more focused on the large portal that suddenly appears. He remarks on the fake villains emerging from it, and Aizawa, annoyed by his sarcasm, takes a fighting stance. He responds in kind, ready to help. The figure, covered in hands, announces that they are there for one thing: All Might. He drops his fighting stance slightly, confused. He questions why they would think All Might was present, and the arena falls quiet. Next to him, Aizawa whispered that All Might had been hired as a teacher for UA this year. He couldn't believe it. He had never been a huge fan of All Might, but he respected him as the symbol of peace. The thought of fighting him was daunting. It was as if All Might could withstand any attack with just a smile. That was unsettling. When he thought of All Might, a teacher was the last thing that came to mind. As far as he knew, All Might didn't even have a teaching license. In fact, he might set a bad example by encouraging students to push past their limits. He had been there and done that, and it had not ended well. Suddenly, a figure with hands began scratching his neck, and a man surrounded by purple mist appeared beside him. They exchanged a few words before a purple portal opened beneath him and some of the other students. Before he knew it, he was free falling toward the water. Using his telekinesis, he stopped himself just before hitting the surface. Looking around, he spotted a boat nearby. How convenient! He scanned for other students and saw Mineta and Tsu making their way toward the boat. He lifted them out of the water with his telekinesis, and they landed on the boat, wide-eyed. Tsu asked if that was his quirk, to which he simply replied yes, though he didn't see how that was relevant. Mineta began to cry, and he awkwardly patted him on the back, trying to reassure him. Mineta stared at him in disbelief. Despite his annoying tendencies, he understood that this situation was frightening even for him. None of them had anticipated an attack from villains today. They needed to get off the boat, and both Mineta and Tsu nodded in agreement. He used his telekinesis to lift them from the boat and onto solid ground. It took a moment to realize they had landed very close to a man with a peculiar appearance and a strange mutant creature. That was unsettling. The other two ducked behind a rock, while he stared at the man, who looked familiar in an unsettling way. He couldn't quite place it, but he felt a sense of unease. He called out to the man, asking him to remove his hand from his face for a moment. The man simply stood there, ignoring him. He repeated that it was rude to ignore someone, but the man snapped back, telling him to be quiet. It clicked. The man was Shigaraki Tamura. He had never met him personally, but he had gathered information from various sources about a new group called the League of Villains. The name wasn't particularly creative, but he wasn't in a position to judge. He was certain that this man was Shigaraki. He recognized him from the descriptions he had heard, which often included a mention of his dry lips. He addressed Shigaraki, expressing surprise at meeting him. Shigaraki glared at him and commanded a creature called Nomu to bring him forward. The Nomu began charging at him, and he realized he needed a plan. He had no idea what this creature was capable of, but he started dodging its slow attacks, which soon became faster and harder to evade. After a few moments of dodging, he devised a strategy. He stepped back, took a deep breath, and unleashed a blast of fire at the Nomu. Shigaraki laughed, claiming that the Nomu had regeneration abilities and was as strong as All Might, dismissing his flames as ineffective. What Shigaraki didn't realize was that he wasn't just randomly attacking. He aimed for the creature's most vulnerable spot, its brain. His throat began to burn, but he refused to give up. The Nomu emitted a scream that echoed in his ears, a sound that would haunt him forever, as it sounded disturbingly human. He hesitated, but if this creature had once been human, it likely didn't want to be Shigaraki's puppet. Eventually, the Nomu collapsed, and he ceased his flames. Shigaraki returned to scratching his neck and muttering about cheating. Before he could celebrate his victory, he was overtaken by a coughing fit, smoke pouring from his mouth and nose. He struggled to breathe, the sounds around him fading into the distance. As he gasped for air, he thought about how this would make for an incredible story someday, if he survived. It was strange that instead of worrying about his mother, he was joking about telling his future children about this near-death experience. He hoped it would remain just that, a near-death experience. Bakugo had his own tale to tell. He had fallen through a hole and found himself trapped with shitty hair in a building full of villains. Together, they had fought their way through and were now searching for other classmates. That was when he spotted Deku, unleashing flames at a mutant creature. Watching Deku brought back memories of their childhood, when Deku first discovered his quirk. They had been playing outside when smoke began to billow from Deku's mouth. Instead of being excited, Deku had panicked and run to his mother, only to start coughing out fire. Bakugo had thought it was amazing, but Deku had burst into tears. Later that week, Deku had awakened his telekinesis, which he had handled much better. Bakugo felt proud to call him a friend. He had received his own quirk a month later, with everyone telling him he would become a great hero. No one had ever told Deku that, likely because he was always setting off fire alarms and coughing up smoke. That didn't stop him from being friends with Deku, though. They were going to be a team, the best heroes anyone had ever seen. That was until Deku's mom pulled him out of school 2 years later, and all contact was lost. Whenever he asked his mom about Deku, she would say that he and his mom were out of town. But he waited anyway, for 5 years. He waited to see his best friend again. And here Deku was, risking his life to save others. Their parents and teachers blamed him for Deku's changes, but he never did. Well, his goals never changed. Deku wanted to be someone people could rely on, someone who made others feel safe. On the other hand, he wanted to be number one and surpass All Might. They had very different goals. He had zoned out a bit, but the sound of screams brought him back to the present. He focused on the fight and saw the creature falling to its knees, screaming. He looked at Deku, who had a look of terror on his face. It was disgusting. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Fuai hair nodding in agreement. The creature stopped screaming and Deku stood a few feet away, panting, with smoke coming from his mouth and nose. He stood still for a moment before doubling over, coughing and gasping for air. He rushed toward Deku, calling out his name. Deku looked in his direction, but his eyes rolled back, and he passed out. He caught him just before he hit the ground. Smoke continued to pour from Deku's nose and mouth. He picked him up and started running toward the entrance when Mist Man appeared in front of him, blocking his way. He shouted for him to move. A voice behind him said he couldn't take Deku away. He turned around to see a guy covered in hands, scratching his neck and looking at him with wild red eyes. The guy continued, saying Deku had cheated and would pay for what he had done. He glared at the man, insisting that Deku wouldn't pay for anything. The man taunted him about his temper when gunshots rang out, and the man fell to the ground. He looked toward the entrance and saw a group of pro-heroes, including All Might. Instead of celebrating like the others, he stared at them. Still carrying Deku, he walked up to the heroes, expressing his annoyance at how long they took to arrive. Sonic told him he should show them more respect, but he retorted that Deku was the one who saved them while the heroes were taking their time. He walked out of the USJ with Deku to find police and an ambulance waiting. He ran toward the ambulance, where they placed Deku on a stretcher and into the vehicle. He watched as they took him away. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, checking for a signal. He dialed the number Deku had given him for emergencies. The phone rang a few times before a voice answered. It was Inko. He spoke quietly, hoping Deku would be okay. Meanwhile, Shigaraki was furious. He threw a bar stool, venting his frustration. The TV reminded him not to take his anger out on furniture. He grumbled in response, feeling that everything had been ruined by that brat and his angry friend. He couldn't believe that a teenager had defeated the Nomu. He vowed to get his revenge. In the hospital, he opened his eyes, realizing he was the one in the hospital. He sat up and looked around, noting that it resembled a schoolroom more than a hospital. An old lady with a cane approached him, confirming he was awake. She informed him that he had overused his quirk at the USJ and had second-degree burns on his throat. He groaned, dramatically flopping back onto the bed, asking when he could leave. The nurse wanted him to stay another day just in case, which frustrated him. Later, the nurse announced he had a visitor. He sighed, guessing who it was. Kaken entered, looking furious. He called him an idiot, and they exchanged playful insults. Kaken sat down, and after a moment of silence, he told him not to do that again. They continued to bicker, but Kaken's concern was evident. He asked about Deku's throat, and they shared a laugh about the possibility of matching scars. Their banter continued for a little longer before Kaken got up to leave, promising to see him the next day. As Kaken headed for the door, he asked if he had called his mom. She visited while he was still unconscious, and he nodded in acknowledgement. As he opened the door, he recalled her words about visiting again later. The thought made him uneasy, but he decided to face that challenge when the time came. He was informed that he was free to leave but needed to be careful and not speak too much. He acknowledged this while getting off the bed and stretching. The reminder not to use his quirk caught him off guard, and he reacted with surprise, only to find himself coughing again. The nurse explained that he couldn't use it for about a month, or he risked further damage to his throat, potentially losing his voice. He nodded in understanding, quickly donned the uniform she had prepared, and headed to class. As he entered the classroom, he greeted the large door with a sense of familiarity. All eyes turned toward him, prompting him to question if something was on his face. A classmate pointed out his neck, and he turned to see Katsuki grinning widely. He called Katsuki an unpleasant name, to which Katsuki responded playfully. The class continued to watch their exchange as he took his seat behind Katsuki. Aizawa entered shortly after and acknowledged Midoriya's return. Midoriya asked if Aizawa had missed him, but Aizawa ignored the question and addressed the class. He reminded them that the sports festival was approaching and encouraged them to train their quirks, noting that the world was watching them after the recent events at the USJ. Midoriya muttered about the jealousy from other students, and those around him nodded in agreement. When the school day ended, he celebrated as the bell rang. A few classmates approached him with an invitation to train. He stood up and humorously declined, claiming he had to walk his unicorn, leaving them confused as he exited. Katsuki questioned the excuse, and Midoriya shrugged, admitting he was often surprised by his own words. As they entered Katsuki's room, Katsuki asked about the restriction on using his fire quirk. Midoriya confirmed it and noted the upcoming sports festival. Katsuki expressed his desire to compete against Midoriya at his best, not when he was holding back. Midoriya explained that he didn't see the point in using fire against fire, and after a moment of thought, Katsuki agreed. Midoriya lay back on the bed, expressing his frustration about the situation, and Katsuki acknowledged it as well. After a brief silence, Midoriya complained about the boredom, prompting Katsuki to roll his eyes. Midoriya suggested they do something, anything, to break the monotony. Katsuki's mischievous grin indicated he had an idea, but he quickly dismissed it, stating it was off the table. He then pulled Midoriya off the bed, insisting they go out. Katsuki's excitement brought them to the arcade, a place Midoriya had mixed feelings about. Katsuki had often dragged him there in their younger days, and while it was annoying, it was the overwhelming noise, lights, and crowd that truly bothered him. As Katsuki called him by his first name, Midoriya paused, surprised. Katsuki brushed off his concern and led him to a game called Whack-A-Mole. Midoriya, despite his appearance, had a soft heart and didn't want to harm the moles. Katsuki, however, was relentless, enthusiastically smashing any mole that dared to show its head. Midoriya took a gentler approach, choosing to protect the moles instead. In the end, Katsuki emerged victorious, boasting about his win, while Midoriya rolled his eyes and reminded him he owed him. They left the arcade, and Midoriya declared they would never return, to which Katsuki insisted he had fun. Midoriya sarcastically remarked about losing multiple times, and they continued their playful banter as they stepped back into the world outside the arcade. As if he could beat me, he laughed. I tripped him with my foot, and he fell flat on his face. I laughed, declaring that I had all the revenge I needed now. He got up, glaring at me, and warned that I would pay for that. I continued to laugh until I started coughing. He grumbled that I was an idiot, to which I replied, acknowledging my state but reminding him who was just kissing the ground. He flipped me off in response. As we entered his house, Katsuki asked if I was staying the night or going back. I decided to stay and headed over to the couch. He reminded me that I couldn't avoid Inko forever, to which I insisted I wasn't avoiding her. He sat next to me, and I thought about how there was nothing wrong with a guy hiding from his mother, especially when he knew she would likely ground him for life. If anything, I was avoiding consequences, not my mom. Katsuki suggested watching the sports festival from last year, and I agreed. The next day, Aizawa announced that tomorrow was the sports festival and that we better be prepared before dismissing us. I got up from my seat and stretched, realizing the festival was indeed tomorrow. Just then, someone in the class mentioned we had company. I turned to see my classmate standing at the door, and as I pushed my way through, I found even more people crowded in front of it, blocking our way. I asked if they had left class early to visit us, but their eyes were not friendly. They glared at me as if they were daggers piercing my soul. A kid with purple hair and bags under his eyes remarked that they came to see what the great Class 1A looked like. I found it amusing and responded that everyone in our class had earned their spot and worked hard for it, pointing out examples like Kirishima, Katsuki, Siro, and even Mineta. I had looked into Mineta's file, baffled at how someone like him got into Class 1A. Ibags glanced at the rest of the class and then back at me, claiming we were just big talk. I countered that we faced real villains, watched our teacher endure serious battles, and nearly die, while they only cared about our fame. I asserted that everyone behind me deserved to be in this class because they had goals they hoped to accomplish. The crowd fell silent, and I pointed out Katsuki, explaining that he scored the highest in the entrance exam and aimed to be the #1 hero to surpass All Might. Then I pointed to Uraraka, the kindest person I knew, and asked if anyone wanted to know why she wanted to be a hero. When no one spoke, I shrugged and said it was simply for money, which caused an uproar among the crowd and my classmates. I could hear Uraraka crying behind me, but I silenced the crowd, insisting I wasn't finished. I continued, explaining that Uraraka wanted to support her family, not for selfish reasons. I highlighted other classmates' motivations. Ida wanted to follow in his family's footsteps, Jiro aimed to make her parents proud, Kirishima wanted to be like his hero, Kaminari sought respect, Momo wished to help others, Mina wanted to save people, and Tsuyu believed she could make a difference. I kept my gaze fixed on Ibags the entire time. He asked what my reason was, and I paused to think. I realized I was only here because I got caught. I had wanted to be like Katsuki, but my motivations had shifted. I wanted to help people too. I told him to kindly get out of our way, but they didn't move. Frustrated, I used my telekinesis to create a path, pushing people against the walls and walking past them. Katsuki remarked that it was quite a speech, but I muttered that it was stupid and that they were jealous for no good reason, wiping blood from my nose, a drawback of my quirk. He nodded and asked how I knew why the others wanted to be heroes. I explained that it was obvious if you observed them long enough. He laughed at my suggestion to pay more attention to the class, calling me a nerd. Later, Katsuki called my name, warning me not to half-heartedly participate. I returned to changing my clothes, dismissing his concern. He offered to take me to the most popular arcade in Japan if he won, which caught me off guard. Before I could argue, we heard the announcer welcoming us to this year's sports festival. As I prepared for the event, I reflected on how my life had turned out this way. Getting beaten up was never part of the plan. My classmates cheered me on, reminding me that I could do better, and I realized that my speech had earned their support. Well, besides half and half, that is. The guy is a mystery. One moment he's sharing his life story and asking if he's his father's secret love child, and the next, he's attacking me like there's no tomorrow. I will admit I feel bad for him. What Endeavor did to Todoroki is unforgivable. But what Todoroki is doing to me now is also unforgivable. I understand he's had a tough life, but he shouldn't take it out on me. He yells from across the arena, urging me to use my fire. I shout back that I can't, for what feels like the 100th time. He glares at me and sends another blast of ice my way. I use my telekinesis to shatter it into pieces. This is getting old, I think, as I dodge more icy projectiles. He tells me to shut up. Now, before I continue, let's rewind to about an hour ago when I wasn't getting pummeled by Todoroki. The announcer booms, welcoming everyone to this year's sports festival, and calls for Class 1A. As we walk into the stadium, cheers erupt from the crowd, and I start regretting my life choices. Other classes join us as Yamahata calls them out. Then Namuri, also known as Midnight, steps onto the stage in her hero costume and grabs the microphone. She announces that before the festival begins, we'll hear from the student with the highest score in the entrance exam. I know it's not me since I didn't take the entrance exam. If I had, it probably would have been me, but the only person I can think of who would have the highest score is Bakugo Katsuki. He walks up to the stage with that smug look on his face and declares that he's going to win. The crowd boos, as do the students from other classes. The members of Class 1A stare at him blankly, and we all thought he might swallow his pride for. But no, not the great Bakugo Katsuki. He walks off the stage, looking satisfied with himself. That was interesting, I think. Moving on. The first challenge is announced, an obstacle course. Sounds easy, but knowing Yue and Nizu, it's probably going to be the most dangerous obstacle course imaginable. Would you look at that? I won. No surprise there, I suppose. The look on Katsuki's face when I won was priceless. I surprised myself there. Those robots were excessive and a waste of money now that they're destroyed. And that minefield? That could have seriously injured someone. I might have set off a few when someone Katsuki got too close. But hey, all's fair in love and war. The announcer congratulates those moving on to the next event, the cavalry battle. You've got to be kidding me. I feel a hand on my shoulder. Katsuki asks if I want to team up. I swat his hand away, telling him not to do that, but he takes it as a yes. The goal is to have the highest amount of points by stealing other teams' headbands to move on to the next round. And the person who won the obstacle course starts off with 10 million points. Katsuki decides it's best to part ways for a bit, but I grab the collar of his shirt, insisting he come back. Katsuki looks unimpressed as he surveys our team. After my doom was announced, everyone avoided me, so I pulled some strings and found two others to join us, Tokoyami and Mei. Technically, Mei wanted to be on our team, and I had to convince Tokoyami to leave his other team. I hand the headband to Katsuki, who asks what he's supposed to do with it. I tell him to wear it, but he refuses. I remind him of the class president's orders, and Ida, doing his robotic dance, glares at Katsuki, urging him to put it on. Katsuki grumbles and snatches it from my hand. I explain the plan. Katsuki will be the rider since everyone is scared of him, and his quirk will come in handy. Tokoyami and Mei will be in the back, with Tokoyami using Dark Shadow for defense and Mei with her inventions. I'll be in the front to use my quirks effectively. Katsuki asks if I plan to use my fire. I mention that Icy Hot will likely come after us, so I'm just being prepared. We get into formation as Namuri starts the countdown. Ready? Go! As expected, everyone rushes toward us. I tell them to hold on as I use my telekinesis to lift us off the ground. Tokoyami questions how I know there isn't anyone who can fly up to us. I explain that based on the obstacle course, the only person to worry about is Uraraka, but she gets sick easily, and I doubt she can hold up 4 to 5 people yet. He nods in understanding. I ask Mei if she has any gadgets that could help keep us in the air, as I can't do this forever. She activates the boots she's wearing, and I slowly stop using my telekinesis, relieved to see we're still airborne. Someone shouts from below, demanding we come down and fight them. I respond that it's nice up here without anyone trying to attack us. Yamahata yells if this is even allowed. I glance at the recording booth and shout back that I'm not getting down into that pit of power-hungry teenagers. A few laughs come from the crowd, and Aizawa sighs into the microphone, stating he sees no problem with what my team is doing. We're simply using our quirks and gadgets to our advantage. And with the 100 million headband, this is probably the only way they'll be able to keep it safe. Katsuki shouted, questioning whether they were strong enough to fight those extras. I intervened, telling him to calm down, but he insisted on not being told what to do. Namuri announced that there were 2 minutes remaining, prompting Mei to ask if I could take over again. I agreed, using my telekinesis to hold us up once more. When the time was called, Yamahata shouted that time was up. I sighed in relief as I slowly guided us back toward the ground. Tokoyami expressed some guilt about how we had played the game, but I reassured him that we had worked smarter, not harder, before dropping Katsuki, who protested. As Namuri began announcing the winners, she declared that Team Midoriya had taken first place with 100 million points. The crowd responded with a few claps and cheers. Yamahata then announced a lunch break before we exited the arena to head to the lunch area. Midoriya turned around to see Todoroki approaching him. He asked what Todoroki wanted to discuss, and they found a quiet hallway to talk face to face. Midoriya recalled that Katsuki had bet that Todoroki would ask him out, but he doubted it. Todoroki mentioned Midoriya's quirk, noting that he hadn't used his fire during the challenges, only his telekinesis. Midoriya pointed out that Todoroki himself had never used his fire in class. Todoroki acknowledged this but insisted it was just an observation. Midoriya decided to be honest, suggesting that he should be the one asking Todoroki why he never used his fire. Todoroki seemed to consider this. Midoriya reassured him that he didn't need to worry, he just couldn't use it right now. When Todoroki pressed for a reason, Midoriya questioned why he was so curious, noting that this was the longest he had ever heard Todoroki speak. Todoroki then asked about Midoriya's father, which caught him off guard. He bluntly replied that he didn't have one, but Todoroki remained silent. Midoriya asked if he could leave, but Todoroki had one last question. He wanted to know what Midoriya thought of Endeavor. Midoriya pointed out that everyone knew Endeavor was Todoroki's father, and he expressed his lack of admiration for the hero, having fought him on several occasions. Todoroki, seemingly frustrated, suggested that they shared similarities, which made him wonder if there was a connection. Midoriya interrupted, insisting he would know if Endeavor was his father. Todoroki explained that his parents were in a quirk marriage, and while his siblings were seen as failures, he was considered the masterpiece, who could surpass all might. Midoriya realized that Todoroki was under immense pressure from his father and expressed concern about setting himself up for failure by relying solely on his ice. Todoroki shot him a glare, insisting he could win with just his ice. Midoriya countered that he couldn't win with just his telekinesis. Todoroki asserted that he wasn't using his fire out of spite, he simply couldn't. As Todoroki walked away, he reiterated his determination to win with only his ice. Midoriya, determined as well, turned and walked in the opposite direction. After a moment, Midoriya told Katsuki that he could. Come out now. Katsuki admitted he had been wrong about Todoroki. When Katsuki asked if Midoriya was going to confront Endeavor, a gruff voice interrupted, asking what they were discussing. They turned to see Endeavor approaching. Midoriya boldly replied that they were talking about how he mistreated his kids and sent his wife away. Endeavor growled, demanding Midoriya repeat himself. Midoriya stood his ground, stating that Todoroki wasn't him and he wasn't All Might. Endeavor laughed, seemingly unfazed, but Midoriya pressed on, telling him to stop treating Todoroki like he was All Might. Endeavor, taken aback, demanded to know how Midoriya had gotten in, realizing the confrontation was far from over. He yelled that he was not a villain and had been asked to attend UA, more like forced. Katsuki mumbled under his breath. Katsuki was swiftly told to be quiet. Endeavor laughed, questioning why they would let him in, suggesting they must have taken pity on him. The response was that no one really knew how hero decisions were made these days, and with a turn, he said goodbye to Endeavor. Katsuki commented that he would probably end up going against half and half in the next round, to which the reply was that it was most likely. Katsuki then asked what the plan was, and the response was simply to wing it. Katsuki muttered about why he even bothered with him as they walked back out into the arena. The announcer congratulated everyone who had made it this far and introduced the next event, the battle tournament. Just as the pairing matchups were about to be revealed, someone interrupted, asking to withdraw from the tournament. The arena fell silent as all eyes turned to Ojiro, who was giving up his chance at victory and reputation. Midnight, the announcer, stated that unless he had a good reason, he could not withdraw. Ojiro explained that he felt he had cheated during the cavalry battle due to manipulation by a teammate's quirk. He believed it would be unfair to continue, and after a moment of consideration, Midnight granted his request to withdraw. As Ojiro left, another student confessed he wanted to withdraw as well, leading to a collective thought of why they all didn't just withdraw. Once that was settled, the pairings were announced. A hologram displayed Midoriya Izuku versus Shinso Hitoshi, a name unfamiliar to him. Katsuki asked if he knew who Uraraka was, and upon confirmation he pointed out Uraraka, who was staring at Katsuki in shock. The announcer declared the first match, Midoriya Izuku versus Shinso Hitoshi, with the battle set to begin shortly. Unsure of who Shinso was, Midoriya turned to see Ojiro calling him over. Ojiro wanted to talk, and Midoriya expressed hope that he wouldn't share his life story, explaining he had already experienced a strange day. Ojiro clarified that he had dropped out because Shinso had been brainwashing his team during the cavalry battle. He warned Midoriya to be careful and not respond to anything Shinso said. Midoriya thanked him and promised to win the match for him. As he entered the arena, he spotted Shinso on the opposite side. Nemuri began the countdown. 3, 2, 1, begin. Neither of them moved, and the stadium was silent, filled with anticipation. Midoriya thought that someone who accused others of not being fit for the hero course should make the first move. He asked Shinso if he was just going to stand there, shoving his hands into his pockets. He knew it made him look cocky, but he wanted to make a point that Shinso was no threat. Shinso glared but mirrored Midoriya's stance, putting his hands in his pockets as well. Midoriya considered ending the match quickly with his telekinesis but found no excitement in that. Shinso attempted to provoke him, asking if he was the Vigilante Deku. Aizawa, the teacher, was caught off guard, but the crowd remained silent. Midoriya nodded in response, and annoyance flashed across Shinso's face. Shinso continued to question how someone like Midoriya got into the hero course, which led to Midoriya feeling as though he was in a game of 20 questions. Suddenly, Midoriya found himself unable to move, realizing that Shinso needed a verbal response to activate his brainwashing quirk. He felt a surge of frustration as Shinso commanded him to walk out of the arena. Midoriya refused to be known as the one who lost by simply walking out. He was determined not to embarrass himself, especially after promising Ojiro he would win. As he took steps toward the out-of-bounds line, he recalled how Ojiro had managed to break free. He was not going to be defeated by someone he deemed arrogant. He had a plan that had worked against a villain with a paralyzing quirk before. He focused and released a burst of telekinetic energy, causing the ground to tremble and wind to swirl around him. With a triumphant shout, he declared himself free and dashed toward Shinso. He landed a punch squarely on Shinso's face, then grabbed his arm and threw him over his shoulder, sending him out of bounds. The announcer declared Midoriya the winner, and Shinso looked at him in disbelief, questioning how he had managed to win. Midoriya explained that Shinso had relied too heavily on his quirk without attempting to fight back. Your quirk is impressive, I'll admit, but it can only get you so far. Next time we fight, you better hit me, the protagonist thought as he interrupted his opponent. The other boy nodded and got to his feet. They shook hands, and he asked if he was really Deku. The protagonist confirmed he was the one and only. The protagonist reflected on how clever his previous remark had been, feeling proud of his creativity. He considered continuing but decided it was best to leave it at that. He promised to make the next chapter longer and focus on the upcoming fight between Todoroki and Midoriya, surprised by how many readers were engaged with his story. He hoped everyone was enjoying it as much as he enjoyed writing it. He felt a twinge of guilt for pushing Todoroki's buttons so much, especially for Shiro, who had been humiliated. The situation had escalated when Todoroki appeared with a concerning expression, one that hinted at his serious intentions. The protagonist had faith in Shiro for a brief moment when he managed to capture Todoroki and spin him around like a puppet. However, the scene had turned chaotic, with half the stadium covered in ice and Shiro trapped within it. The protagonist muttered a comment about Shiro showing off. Nemuri asked if Shiro could move, to which he responded in disbelief that he couldn't. With Shiro unable to continue, Todoroki was declared the winner. The protagonist sighed, realizing he might have to face Todoroki next. He considered dropping out but knew he had already made a significant impression, so backing out wasn't an option. The announcer called for Uraraka Achiko to face Bakugo Katsuki, and the protagonist remarked to Katsuki that he was rooting for the girl, confident she would win. Katsuki laughed, dismissing the comment, and they both prepared for the match. The crowd erupted with mixed reactions, some booing and others supporting Uraraka. The protagonist felt frustrated with the spectators, many of whom were pro-heroes themselves. He believed that if a villain, regardless of gender, posed a threat, he would act without hesitation to protect others. The fight turned out to be quite interesting. Uraraka held her ground and managed to land a few solid hits on Katsuki, but ultimately, Katsuki emerged victorious. The crowd's reaction was muted, with only a few claps from the protagonist and a handful of classmates. After the match, he sought out Uraraka, not to congratulate her but to check on how she was doing, knowing that losing to someone like Katsuki could be tough. As he approached, he overheard her talking to her parents and realized she was stronger than he had given her credit for. He returned to his classmates, where Denki expressed concern about his absence. The protagonist casually mentioned he had gone to check on something and asked what he missed. Shiro informed him that Tetsu and Kirishima were still battling it out. The protagonist watched the match, noting that both competitors eventually passed out, resulting in a tie. Other matches followed, with Denki losing to a girl from 1B after an awkward attempt to ask her out, and Momo being pushed out of bounds by Tokoyami. Ida had a peculiar match where he was used as an advertisement but still managed to win when his opponent stepped out of bounds. Then the announcer called for Todoroki Shoto to face Midoriya Izuku. The protagonist felt a rush of anxiety as he stood up, preparing to face his opponent. His friends cheered him on as he walked away, wishing him good luck. He quickly devised a plan, knowing he couldn't use his fire. His only option was to rely on his telekinesis. He considered throwing Todoroki out of bounds as soon as the match began. Having fought many villains before, he knew that close combat wouldn't be effective against Todoroki's powers, so he aimed to end the match swiftly. As he stepped into the arena, Todoroki approached from the opposite side. They both reached the center as midnight began the countdown. With a determined mindset, the protagonist prepared to unleash his telekinesis and throw Todoroki out of bounds as soon as the match started. But just as he was about to cross the line, he used a wall of ice to stop himself. It seemed this would take longer than he had anticipated. He sent multiple blocks of ice his way, but they all shattered upon impact. He was urged to use his fire, but he refused, revealing that he was holding back in memory of his late father. When pressed further, he admitted that was not the case and used his telekinesis to lift the broken pieces of ice, sending them flying back at his opponent. One of the shards hit the opponent, who tried to dodge the others. He commented that if his rival had used his fire, he could have avoided getting hit and melted the ice. The rival snapped back, frustrated by the taunts. Meanwhile, An observer noted that the two were arguing while fighting, prompting another to wonder what they could possibly be arguing about at such a critical moment. Aizawa sighed, about to explain, but was interrupted when the fighter used his telekinesis to grab the microphone and throw it out the window. The shocked observer reacted with disbelief, while Aizawa shot a glare at the fighter. The fighter felt justified. Aizawa was about to reveal his quirk to everyone, including villains. Being only 15, he had enough to worry about, especially with hero exams approaching. UA was the only school that broadcasted its sports festival, meaning rival schools could learn about their quirks. With Shinso having revealed his identity as Deku, keeping his quirk a secret was now a top priority. Distracted by Aizawa, he allowed his opponent to land a solid hit. The rival taunted him about hitting someone while distracted, to which he replied that he was there to win, not to break a microphone. He then used his telekinesis to lift his opponent into the air instead of throwing him out, ensuring he wouldn't drop him. That would be crossing a line he wasn't willing to cross. Midnight asked if the rival could move, to which he muttered a response as he created an ice ramp and slid down it. The fighter grumbled in disbelief as his opponent landed on the opposite side. He had avoided using his fire for long enough, but now he felt he had no choice. Encouragement from the crowd echoed around him, urging him to do better. His opponent shouted for him to use his fire, but he yelled back in frustration that he couldn't. The rival glared at him, sending another massive chunk of ice his way, which he shattered with his telekinesis. He expressed his annoyance, stating that this was getting old, but the rival only shouted back, sending more ice. Determined not to lose, he resolved to apologize to everyone for keeping his abilities a secret. He had lied to his mother, Katsuki, and even Todoroki. Yes, he could breathe fire like his father, and yes, he had telekinesis like his mother. He had discovered that using both at the same time allowed him to produce fire from his hands and feet. Seeing Todoroki insist on using only ice, he decided to turn that to his advantage. He extended his hands in front of him, acknowledging his rival's request to use his fire. As another chunk of ice was sent his way, he blew a small breath of fire onto his hands, igniting them and melting the ice. The observer exclaimed that it seemed Midoriya had a trick up his sleeve. He grinned and asked why his opponent didn't just surrender. Todoroki declared he would defeat him using only his right side. In that moment, he felt a surge of determination. He had fought more villains and heroes than he could count, and he refused to lose to this rival. He had reached his breaking point, and it was time to show what he was truly capable of. Imagining the scene, two teenagers fought as if their pride depended on it, yelling at each other with fervor. He yelled that he refused to use his opponent's power, insisting it was his quirk, not someone else's. He was seeing red, and while he wanted to help Todoroki, the stubbornness made it incredibly difficult. In the heat of the moment, he thought yelling might knock some sense into Todoroki, but it only resulted in him getting hit. Despite the odds, he managed to win, albeit barely. Yes, he had taken a beating, but he had also dealt significant damage in return. The only success he could claim was getting Todoroki to finally use his fire, though his control over it was lacking due to never having used it before. In the end, he was able to get close enough to throw Todoroki out of bounds. It had been a good match, better than any he had experienced with Endeavor. Speaking of that flaming trash, when Midoriya finally got Todoroki to use his fire, he started shouting a bunch of nonsense like, "Shutu," and, "Now that you're over your little rebellious phase, we can continue your training." The second one was probably Midoriya's favorite. A little rebellious phase that lasted almost 10 years was quite amusing. But now he faced bigger problems. Bakugo Katsuki. That was a significant issue. After dealing with Todoroki, he now had to confront Katsuki, and that was a big no. Midoriya could have sworn he saw every emotion flash across Katsuki's face in a minute: confusion, hurt, anger, and even a hint of pride for a brief moment. When he saw Katsuki after the match, Katsuki glared at him and walked off. Midoriya knew he deserved that. He couldn't help but think about how his mother would react. The thought scared him. Right now, he was just wandering around. He didn't want to go to the infirmary because, as far as he knew, nothing was broken, so there was no point. Turning a corner, he spotted class president Ida on the phone. He watched Ida for a moment, not in a creepy way. Ida was clearly distressed, asking, "Mom? Why are you crying? Are you okay? What? Tensei? I'm on my way." He hung up but didn't move, tears streaming down his face. He removed his glasses and tried to wipe them away. Midoriya approached him, but Ida didn't look up, trying to compose himself. "Hey, Prez," Midoriya said, standing in front of him. "Oh, Midoriya, it's you," Ida replied, sounding relieved. Midoriya stared at him for a moment before letting out a small sigh. "You know, this isn't the only sports festival you'll be able to participate in. There's always next year and the year after." "I leave." Ida's eyes widened slightly before he nodded slowly. Midoriya patted him on the shoulder. "Go see your brother. I'll tell Aizawa that something came up." "Thank you, Midoriya," Ida said before rushing down the hall. Midoriya was tempted to yell at him about running in the halls, but this wasn't the right time. He turned and headed to the announcement booth. Opening the door, he walked in, and Aizawa and Yamahata turned around, surprised. "Oh, it's just you, Midoriya," Aizawa said. "Just me?" "Wow," Midoriya replied as he took a seat. "Why are you in here?" Aizawa asked, ignoring Midoriya's comment. "I've come to be the bearer of bad news." "Bad news?" Yamahata asked, joining the conversation. "Yeah, Prez has some urgent business to take care of and has to leave." "Urgent business?" Aizawa said, giving Midoriya a small glare. "I don't know all the details. All I can tell you is that it's important," Midoriya shrugged. They both continued to stare at him before Aizawa slowly nodded and turned to the microphone. "Due to some issues, Ida Tenya has dropped out. Tokoyami Fumikaji wins by default." A few shouts of disapproval came from the crowd, but nothing serious. Next up, Midoriya Izuku vs. Bakugo Katsuki. Midoriya felt a wave of dread wash over him. He knew this chapter wasn't very long, but he needed to write something to get back into the habit. He also felt bad for not writing a fight scene between Todoroki and himself. It wasn't his strong suit. He hoped everyone was enjoying the story so far and promised to update soon. As he prepared for the upcoming match, he recalled what Todoroki had said about using his fire. Midoriya thought it was ridiculous. He gave Todoroki an annoyed look, wanting to beat him at his best, not when he was holding back. "Katsuki, I'm not holding back," Midoriya sighed. Katsuki glared at the floor, clearly frustrated. "I wasn't even going to use my fire quirk when we most likely fight," Midoriya added with another sigh. "Why not?" Katsuki asked, shocked. Midoriya shrugged. "I see no reason to use fire against fire. It's pointless." Katsuki thought about it for a moment. "It's not pointless, especially since I use explosions, not fire," he muttered. Midoriya nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the situation. Katsuki lay back on the bed, mumbling, still as though. "Yeah." Midoriya agreed, feeling the pressure of the upcoming match. If he beat Katsuki at the sports festival, it would only be because Katsuki wasn't at his best, and that didn't feel fair. He couldn't believe he had once felt sympathy for Katsuki. He had never mentioned he could do more than breathe fire. Why wouldn't he tell him that? Did he not trust him? No, that wasn't it, but Midoriya was still frustrated about whatever it was. He scowled as he continued to watch the fight. "Hey, Bakugo," someone called out. "What?" Katsuki replied, not bothering to look. "I've got a question for you." Katsuki glanced over and saw Shitty Hair sitting next to him. If Midoriya is such a powerful vigilante, how come he's having trouble beating Todoroki? Katsuki rolled his eyes. "That's your question?" "Yeah, and the same thing with the fight against the purple-haired kid. In the videos I saw of Deku, he took villains out in a matter of seconds." Katsuki looked around and noticed a few others staring at him. He sighed in annoyance. "Simple. Fighting villains and fighting us are two completely different things." "How?" Pikachu asked. "We're not a threat to him or those around him. It's different when he fights villains because they can and have hurt people. We, on the other hand, are just a bunch of teenagers who have probably never even seen a real fight, let alone been in one." "That makes sense," an extra said. "Plus, he doesn't want to hurt you guys, and whether he knows it or not, He's subconsciously holding back, Katsuki added, glaring at the floor. Shitty Hair put a hand on his shoulder. That was manly, bro, he said, wiping away a fake tear. Get lost, Katsuki said, shooing his hand away. And the winner is Midoriya. Izuku. No surprise there, Todoroki never stood a chance. A few minutes later, Midoriya approached the bleachers. Katsuki glared at him and stood up, not in the mood for excuses. Midoriya could explain everything after Katsuki beat him. As he wandered around, he heard the announcement. Due to some issues, Ida Tenya has dropped out. Tokoyami Fumikaji wins by default. Ha! Katsuki said out loud. Next up, Midoriya Izuku vs Bakugo Katsuki. He couldn't help but laugh. You know you're in trouble when Bakugo Katsuki looks happy to see you. As I walked into the arena, I spotted him smiling on the other side. It wasn't the usual menacing grin. It was more like a, I'm going to challenge you, but in a friendly way, kind of smile. I felt flattered, but I had devised a plan. Was it a good one? Maybe not. I knew that if I didn't fight Katsuki, he would become furious, so I decided to engage him for exactly 10 minutes. Those would likely be the longest 10 minutes of my life, considering Katsuki's intensity. I had come to terms with the consequences of losing, being dragged to the depths of despair, and realized I valued my life more than a trip to that dark place. I would give Katsuki what he wanted, a fair fight for 10 minutes. Then I would make it look like I accidentally stepped out of bounds, and he would win. I didn't really want to win anyway. It would attract too much attention to me. Being Deku was hard enough. The countdown began, and with a loud boom, the match started. Katsuki yelled at me to use my new fire move as I dodged his attacks. I employed my telekinesis, recalling my strategy against Todoroki, but instead of ice, I lifted rubble and debris, sending it flying toward Katsuki. He got hit by a few pieces before exploding the others. He shouted at me to use my fire, and I replied that I was experiencing déjà vu. Katsuki sped toward me like a rocket, and I dodged his attacks, trying to spin him out of the square. He managed to stop himself with his explosions, which irritated me. Katsuki demanded to know why I wouldn't use my new trick on him, questioning what made Todoroki so special. I retorted that if I used it, the fight would be over in seconds. He challenged me to bet on it, and I eagerly accepted. I ignited my hands, creating fire spheres and targeting his shoulders, knowing they were a weak point due to the strain from his powerful explosions. The spheres hit their mark, causing him to wince and glare at me before he unleashed a massive explosion in my direction. I used my telekinesis to create a wall of debris. It wouldn't stop the explosion entirely, but it would slow it down enough to keep me safe. Katsuki complained about my lack of smaller explosions, and I replied that there was no fun in that. I then formed a sphere around the same size as his explosion. Aizawa's voice came through the microphone, warning me against using it on Katsuki, but I insisted he wouldn't die if he dodged. I knew that throwing this sphere at Katsuki could be dangerous, but I was still trying to push him out of the ring. I threw the sphere to the ground, causing it to explode in the center of the arena. As the smoke cleared, I saw Katsuki standing on the other side, no longer smiling and staring me down. And the winner was declared, Bakugo Katsuki. I looked down at my feet, realizing I had stepped out of bounds. It had been a few days since the sports festival, and Katsuki refused to speak to me. During the award ceremony, he had ended up chained to a wall, and All Might had placed the medal in his mouth because he wouldn't let it be put around his neck. When I got home that day, my mom had given me a stern talking to. She was upset that I had ignored her after the USJ incident and that I hadn't told her about my new fire trick. After half an hour of scolding, she hugged me, saying she had passed out several times during the sports festival out of worry. She remarked that it sounded like I had done more work than she had. I tried to lighten the mood, but she reminded me that it wasn't over for Katsuki. Based on his behavior during the awards, she doubted he would ever forgive me. I sighed, acknowledging that he seemed to want to lose to me. My mom pointed out that not only was I his best friend, but I was also Deku, the vigilante known for never losing a fight until now. I insisted that fighting Katsuki was different from battling villains. My mom sighed, knowing I had never intended to win the sports festival. Katsuki probably realized that too but still gave it his all while I had pushed myself out of bounds with my flashy move. Apologizing to Katsuki wouldn't help, it would likely make him angrier. I had two options: find a way to get Katsuki to talk to me or make new friends. For now, I decided to stick with the first option. Making new friends seemed too complicated. I walked into class and took my seat. Katsuki ignored me while a few others greeted me. As everyone settled in, we waited for Aizawa to arrive. Aizawa congratulated us on our performances at the sports festival, acknowledging that there were areas for improvement but that we had all done well. Most of the class clapped in celebration, but then he shifted the tone to the hard part: recommendations. Momo raised her hand, asking if everyone would receive a recommendation. Aizawa confirmed that, regardless of our performances, we would each get at least one recommendation. He held up a remote and turned on the projector. Names with numbers next to them appear on the screen. Todoroki Shoto, 1569. Bakugo Katsuki, 1499. Tokoyami Fumikaji, 986. Ida Tenya, 875. Kirishima Ejiro, 874. Kaminari Denki, 765. Ashido Mina, 590. Shiro Hinata, 489. Midoriya Izuku. The class stares in shock at Midoriya's single request. He shrugs, not particularly surprised, and explains that they are likely scared of him. Kaminari questions this, and Midoriya elaborates that as the savior of Japan, a low-ranking hero would be hesitant to teach him. Shiro then asks who requested him, to which Midoriya admits he has no idea. Aizawa shakes his head and pulls out a stack of papers. He instructs the class to look through the names of the heroes who requested them and to write down the top 3 they would accept. Midoriya grabs his sheet and sees only one name, Gran Torino, with no rank or agency listed and the reason for the request stating that a reckless brat needs a lesson. Midoriya finds this suspicious and notices a note in the corner: "Meet me in the teacher's lounge after class, All Might." Intrigued, he reflects on his limited interactions with All Might, having only seen him at the awards ceremony. He wonders why All Might wants to talk to him, especially since he has never heard of Gran Torino, despite his extensive knowledge of heroes worldwide. Determined to take on Gran Torino, Midoriya peers over Katsuki's shoulder to see his request. Katsuki has caught the attention of Best Jeanist, the number 3 pro hero. Midoriya expresses his surprise at Katsuki's request, and they engage in a playful exchange about confidentiality before Midoriya rushes out the door, claiming he has important business. However, he quickly realizes he doesn't know where the teacher's lounge is and returns to class. Aizawa questions him about his sudden departure, and Midoriya insists on needing directions. All Might then appears, apologizing for Midoriya's lack of knowledge about the teacher's lounge. All Might leads Midoriya to the lounge, holding the door open for him. Inside, a figure stands with his back turned. All Might announces Midoriya's arrival, and the figure turns around, introducing himself as Miro Togata. Midoriya feels a sense of foreboding about the encounter. Later, Midoriya learns from All Might that Gran Torino, who requested him, was also a mentor to both All Might and Mirio. Mirio explains that Gran Torino is known to be intimidating, which causes All Might to shake nervously. Midoriya, undeterred, expresses his eagerness to meet Gran Torino, prompting Mirio to challenge him to a friendly competition. Midoriya confidently accepts the challenge, but All Might warns him that he can still change his mind about the request. Midoriya insists that the very fact Gran Torino requested him is why he wants to go. He appreciates the heads-up from All Might and Mirio, who wishes him well as he leaves the teacher's lounge. As Midoriya heads toward the student cafeteria, he spots Katsuki sitting alone at a table, picking at his food. I headed over to the table and sat across from him. He interrupted me before I could speak, stating he didn't want to hear any lame apologies. I feigned indifference, claiming I wasn't going to apologize anyway. He gave me a look before shaking his head, dismissing my words. As I was about to continue, I finally said I was sorry. He slammed his hands on the table, expressing his frustration. He didn't want to hear my excuses and insisted I had pushed myself too far. I tried to defend myself, saying it was an accident, but he wouldn't let it go, accusing me of planning to lose from the start. I fell silent, and he taunted me for not having a comeback. Anger bubbled within me and I glared at him, calling him an idiot. He shot back, saying if I was an idiot, then I was a coward. I retorted that he didn't scare me, but he pressed further, questioning why I had lost on purpose. I insisted I didn't want to win, which he dismissed as nonsense. He claimed he wanted to defeat me fairly, but I had chosen to be a coward. Frustrated, I stood up and declared the situation ridiculous, walking away. He yelled after me, calling me a coward. I locked myself in a bathroom stall, feeling exasperated. I thought he, of all people, would understand my reasons for not wanting to win, but instead he threw a tantrum over it. Later, I decided to go out that night. Katsuki, still fuming, reflected on the situation. He couldn't believe I had chosen to lose on purpose, especially after he had urged me to give it my all. He recalled how we weren't a threat to anyone, unlike villains who could genuinely hurt people. An extra chimed in, agreeing that I was probably holding back subconsciously to avoid hurting my friends. Katsuki shook his head, feeling frustrated. He believed I looked down on him, seeing him as inferior and merely feeling pity for him. A friend approached him, asking if everything was all right between us. Katsuki rolled his eyes, insisting we were fine, though his friend pointed out that our conversation had seemed tense. He mentioned how we hadn't seen each other in years, and now that we were reunited, we had gotten into a fight. Katsuki dismissed his concern, but his friend continued, suggesting that my attempt to apologize showed I felt bad about what happened. Katsuki insisted he didn't care about my feelings, but his friend urged him to reconsider, reminding him that I was his best friend. Katsuki stubbornly replied that I meant nothing to him. His friend sighed, shaking his head sadly, pointing out that our fight wasn't manly and that I often faced villains, which could lead to injuries. Katsuki felt surrounded by idiots. Meanwhile, school finally ended for me. I rushed home, eager to see my mother. Upon entering, I called out to her, and she responded from the living room. I found her on the couch, mending a hole in my vigilante suit. I expressed my gratitude, but she insisted it was the least she could do. I mentioned my plans to go out, but she wanted to hear about my day first. I shared that I received a request for help, and she was surprised to learn I only had one. I laughed, explaining that the person was Gran Torino, a mentor to All Might. My mother hadn't heard of him, and I shrugged, admitting I only knew he wasn't a villain because All Might confirmed it. She expressed her happiness for me and encouraged me to go out and fight villains. Excitedly, I ran to my room to change into my outfit. Meanwhile, Shigaraki watched the news, grumbling about my return as Vigilante Deku. He learned from Kurojuri that I was known for taking down villains ruthlessly and was considered a savior of Japan. Intrigued, he decided to bring me in. The next morning, I groaned as I got out of bed, feeling the aftermath of last night's encounter. I had taken a few hits, particularly on my shoulder and leg. My leg throbbed painfully, a reminder of the fight with a villain who could turn his body into spikes. In retaliation, I had burned his eyebrows off, imagining he would have a terrible mugshot. I also recalled pulling a muscle while saving a child from traffic, which had worsened during my fight. Despite these setbacks, I felt that the night had gone well overall. Izuku had turned a few villains over to the police and saved a child from danger, which he considered a successful night. However, today was a school day, or rather, the start of internships, and that was less exciting. He changed into his school uniform and headed downstairs. His mother noticed him limping and asked about it. Izuku knew she was fine with his vigilante work, but any visible injury sent her into a panic, wanting to rush him to the hospital and keep him from going out again. He lied, saying he had just pulled something and that it was fine. When she inquired about his shoulder, he claimed he had slept on it wrong, lying to her without hesitation. His mother reminded him that today marked the beginning of his internship and urged him to ensure he had everything he needed. He showed her his duffel bag, and she kissed him on the cheek, wishing him well. He hugged her quickly and headed out the door. The rain poured down as he stepped outside. Instead of going back for an umbrella, he used his telekinesis to keep the raindrops from hitting him. rather than taking the train to school, he decided to run. Since the sports festival, random strangers had been approaching him, congratulating him, which had become increasingly annoying. Upon arriving at UA, he walked inside and spotted Ida hanging up his jacket. He hadn't spoken to Ida since the sports festival but understood why he had to leave. Ida's older brother, Ingenium, had been attacked by the hero killer Stain and was hospitalized with severe injuries. Izuku approached Ida and greeted him. Ida responded quickly, and when Izuku asked if he was doing all right, Ida confirmed he was fine. Izuku expressed his sympathy for Ida's brother, but Ida insisted there was no need to apologize since Izuku had nothing to do with it. Curious, Izuku asked about Ingenium's condition, and Ida assured him that he was good and there was nothing to worry about. As Ida turned to walk away, Izuku placed a hand on his shoulder, cautioning him against seeking revenge. Ida remained silent, and Izuku noted that he had seen Ida's choice of internship. He urged Ida not to act recklessly, reminding him that revenge wouldn't solve anything. Ida whispered about his brother's paralysis, which left him unable to be a hero anymore. Izuku struggled to find the right words but reassured Ida that it wasn't his responsibility to teach anyone a lesson. Justice would be served, but not by a 16-year-old. Ida chuckled lightly, acknowledging that as class president, he shouldn't behave that way. He thanked Izuku for his advice and walked away, leaving Izuku with a sense of concern for his friend. Entering the classroom, Izuku searched for Todoroki. He had heard that Todoroki was interning at his father's agency, which seemed like a wise choice given Todoroki's need to learn how to control his fire abilities. However, Izuku wanted to speak to him about Ida and see if he could help keep an eye on him. Izuku sat in front of Todoroki and greeted him, noting his monotone voice. He pulled out a newspaper article about Tensei and Stain and placed it on Todoroki's desk. After reading it, Todoroki recognized Ida's brother and questioned why Izuku had shown him the article. Izuku explained that Ida wanted to avenge his brother and was seeking out Stain. Todoroki was incredulous, but Izuku insisted it was true. He explained that Ida had chosen to intern with Mizushima because that agency was in the area where Tensei was attacked. When Todoroki asked how this related to him, Izuku pointed out that Todoroki's father often patrolled the same areas as Mizushima, where crime was prevalent. He asked Todoroki to keep an eye on Ida if he happened to see him. Todoroki agreed to help but questioned why Izuku was confiding in him instead of Bakugo, who also patrolled that area. Izuku chuckled, explaining that he had met Best Jeanist before and that taking Bakugo on patrol would be the last thing on his mind. Todoroki inquired about Hakamata, and Izuku explained that it was Best Jeanist's real name. When Todoroki asked why he used the heroes' real names, Izuku simply replied that he saw no reason not to. Todoroki then asked if Izuku trusted him more than Bakugo, to which Izuku confirmed that he did for this situation. He elaborated that Bakugo's quirk and personality might not be suitable for dealing with Stain, who had claimed that only All Might was a true hero, while others were merely in it for fame and money. I don't think Katsuki is going to take that lightly. The thought crosses my mind as I whisper about the Stain, ensuring others won't hear. He stares at me and then nods, agreeing to help. I take out a piece of paper and write my phone number on it, handing it to him. He thanks me, and I remind him to text me later so I can have his number too. He nods again, and I head over to my seat. As I sit down, Katsuki comments on my newfound friendship with Icy Hot. I counter by asking when he became best buds with Kirishima. He grunts and looks away, clearly annoyed. It's evident that Kirishima wants to be friends with Katsuki. I believe that their friendship would be beneficial for Katsuki. Kirishima is a genuinely nice guy who embraces everyone, while Katsuki often feels that others look down on him, striving to prove himself as the greatest. Kirishima would be a positive influence. Their friendship won't affect me much. Katsuki isn't the type to abandon people, especially not me. After all, even after 5 or 6 years apart, he remains my best friend. Aizawa walks in and the class quiets down. He announces that today's activity will determine our futures as heroes before we head to our internships. Another pop quiz, great. He mentions code names, and shortly after, Midnight enters in her hero outfit. Aizawa states that since code names aren't his expertise, Midnight will assist us in choosing them before he disappears into his sleeping bag. I chuckle to myself, I already have a name, so this doesn't concern me. Still, I'm curious about what the others will choose. Aoyama steps up first, exclaiming that he cannot stop twinkling. Midnight points out that it's a sentence and suggests removing the I and changing cannot to can't. Aoyama nods in agreement, pleased with the adjustment. I shake my head in disbelief and pull out a notebook to jot down my thoughts. Aoyama Yuga, hero name, can't stop twinkling, rating, 110, it's a sentence. Next up is Mina, who declares her code name as Alien Queen. Midnight quickly tells her to think of something else. Tsu follows, presenting her name as Rainy Season Hero, Froppy. After hearing Aoyama's name accepted and Mina's rejected, the class cheers for Tsu and her choice. Ajuitiu, hero name, Froppy, rating, 10-10, it fits her and her quirk well. The rest of the class presents their names in turn. Kirishima chooses Red Riot, earning an 8-10 for being good but not particularly original. Jiro opts for Earphone Jack, receiving a perfect 10. Kaminari selects Charge Bolt, rated 9-10 for fitting him well, while Shoji's Tentacle gets a solid 10. Suro's Cellophane earns an 8-10, and Ojiro's Tailman is rated 7-10 for creativity. Sato's Sugarman also gets a 7-10, similar to Ojiro's. Mina tries again with two names, Alien Queen and Pinky, rated 8. Hagakure's Invisible Girl is rated 6-10 for lack of creativity. Yuro's Creati receives a 9-10 for fitting her quirk. Todoroki's name, Shoto, is rated 2-10 for its lack of creativity. Fumicage's Tsukuyami earns a perfect 10-10, while Mineta's Grape Juice gets a 6-10, which is still better than Todoroki's. Koda's Anima is rated 9-10, and Katsuki's name, King Explosion Murder, receives a low 1. Uraraka's Uravity impresses everyone with a 10-10 for its brilliance. Ida's choice of Tenya is met with a 0-10, as it's seen as stubbornness rather than creativity. Midnight praises everyone for their code names and hands the floor back to Aizawa after Ida returns to his seat. Kaminari raises his hand, asking about my name. I shrug, stating that I already have one. Some faces show disappointment, and Kirishima suggests that I might want to change my hero name from Deku, as it doesn't fit me anymore. Uraraka asks where the name came from, and I explain that it was a nickname from my childhood, stemming from a different reading of my name. Siro inquires who figured out that Deku was another reading, and all eyes turn to Katsuki, who shrugs, claiming no one ever corrected him. I mumble that they were too scared to do so, earning a glare from him. Kirishima asks about the nickname Kaken, and I explain that I created it when I first met Katsuki, combining the first two letters of his name with Chan. Katsuki rolls his eyes, and I suggest that Kaken should be his hero name, to which he laughs and dismisses the idea. We wait at the train station as Aizawa explains the rules and expectations for our internships. He asks if we understand, and Mina enthusiastically shouts yes. Aizawa corrects her, reminding her to tone it down. She pouts but complies. As we prepare to leave, I ask Todoroki if he remembers the plan. He confirms that he does, and I tell him to text me later as I walk away to find Prez. I encounter Midoriya, who questions why I'm not heading toward my train. I casually mention that I planned on walking there. He seems surprised, and I remind him not to do anything reckless. He thanks me, and I assure him that we're friends, after all. Midoriya felt a sense of camaraderie as he acknowledged their friendship with a soft smile and a wave before heading toward his train. However, Aizawa's piercing gaze caught him off guard. Midoriya admitted he wasn't fond of trains due to the crowds. Aizawa informed him he had heard about Midoriya's recent exploits, mentioning how he had saved a child from traffic and apprehended 20 villains, suggesting that he was becoming a bit complacent. Midoriya brushed it off, claiming he was too busy with the overwhelming amount of homework Aizawa assigned. Aizawa cautioned him to watch his language, but Midoriya simply waved goodbye as he left, feeling Aizawa's eyes on him, especially noticing the limp he tried to hide. As he approached the rundown building he had been searching for, he noted the graffiti that adorned its walls. He shrugged and climbed the stairs, knocking on the door, which unexpectedly swung open. Hesitating for a moment, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He called out to see if anyone was there, but his attention was drawn to the center of the room, where he spotted a body. Panic surged through him, and he turned to leave, only to be startled by a voice proclaiming, "I'm alive." The old man, dressed in an unappealing yellow costume, stood up and smiled innocently, claiming he had dropped the hot dogs. Midoriya couldn't believe this was the same person who made All Might tremble. He tried to clarify the man's identity, but the old man kept insisting he wasn't who Midoriya thought. Midoriya excused himself, needing a moment to process the situation as he stepped outside. He pulled out his phone, searching for All Might's number, convinced that this old man wouldn't be able to teach him anything worthwhile. The old man rummaged through the case Yue had provided and commented on Midoriya's hero costume, expecting him to wear the one he used for vigilante work. Midoriya explained that he didn't know what was in the case, but the old man pulled out a costume and insisted he put it on. Reluctantly, Midoriya took the costume to a nearby room. The suit was nothing like his vigilante attire. It was a bright teal green with a metal mask, a red belt, white gloves, and peculiar black knee pads. The most ridiculous feature was the hood adorned with bunny-like ears. He found a note in one of the pockets, explaining that Yue had been informed of his need for a new hero costume and had taken on the challenge to create something different for him. Sighing, he put on the costume, leaving off the gloves and mask, which he deemed unnecessary. After slipping on his red shoes, he returned to the old man, announcing he was ready. The old man instructed him to demonstrate the impressive move he had showcased at the sports festival. Midoriya laughed, warning that he might accidentally cause destruction. The old man sighed, expressing his frustration with the overconfidence of youth, before suddenly vanishing and bouncing off the walls. Midoriya focused, trying to predict the old man's movements. He finally managed to grab the old man's leg as he attempted to strike again, using his telekinesis to throw him against the wall. The old man got up, impressed but still critical, stating that Midoriya's moves were easy to read. The old man acknowledged Midoriya's control over his quirks but emphasized the need for him to improve further, as enemies wouldn't wait for him to grow stronger. He then announced he was going to get food, leaving Midoriya to clean up the mess. Midoriya surveyed the damage, realizing he could fix the walls with his telekinesis but not the microwave. After tidying up, he changed back into a sweatshirt and pants, waiting for the old man to return. He pondered the old man's words about improvement, feeling a mix of determination and frustration. He had bested the old man, so why did it feel like there was still so much more to learn? Shigaraki observed the group before him, intrigued by their boldness. They had infiltrated Yue, and now they sought his alliance. He raised an eyebrow, questioning their motives. He shrugged, acknowledging their experience. His curiosity piqued when one of them mentioned a target. The desire to eliminate All Might was clear, but there was more. A photograph was produced, revealing a boy named Midoriya Izuku. Shigaraki's expression hardened as he regarded the image. He had little patience for those driven by childish ambitions, and he expressed his disdain for such motives. Meanwhile, Deku found himself in a state of boredom after the old man returned home and promptly fell asleep. With little to occupy his time, he turned to his journal, documenting his thoughts on Gran Torino, the retired hero who had once trained All Might. Gran Torino was known for his unique quirk that allowed him to propel himself with incredible speed, making him a formidable opponent despite his age. Deku noted the old man's unpredictable nature, alternating between confusion and sharp intelligence. He had managed to land a hit on Deku, but the young hero had ultimately prevailed. As the day progressed, Gran Torino inquired about Deku's recent experiments with his quirk. Deku proudly demonstrated the green sparks that signified his concentration. The old man suggested they spar again, and Deku prepared himself for the challenge. This time, he was ready for Gran Torino's swift movements. The fight began, and Deku focused on using his telekinesis to gain the upper hand. However, Gran Torino's agility made it difficult for Deku to catch him off guard. The battle continued, with Deku dodging and searching for an opportunity to strike. He spotted the couch nearby and made a strategic move, diving beneath it. Gran Torino leaped after him, but Deku used his quirk to lift the couch, sending it crashing against the ceiling. Gran Torino, momentarily trapped, conceded defeat, and Deku helped him down. The old man shook his head, feigning disapproval, but Deku couldn't help but smile. He felt he was improving under Gran Torino's guidance. Later, Gran Torino announced their plans for the evening. He instructed Deku to wear his new costume, emphasizing the need for discretion. Deku agreed and headed to his room to prepare. He had crafted his costume from scratch, making adjustments to ensure it suited him better. After some modifications, he stood back to admire his work: a teal tank top with black stripes, matching pants, and a metal mask with ventilation holes. As he tested the mask, a small stream of fire escaped through the holes, eliciting a grin. The support course had truly created something useful for him. Hours later, Gran Torino urged Deku to join him in confronting villains. Deku questioned the necessity of their outing, but the old man explained that continued training was essential to avoid developing bad habits. Deku shrugged, accepting the adventure ahead, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. It was unlikely they would encounter anything significant. He paused by the street and signaled for a car. As they entered the vehicle, she questioned the idea of not running into anything major. He explained that their destination had a decreasing population, which meant a low crime rate. She found that boring, but he continued, noting that most agencies operated in areas with high populations, where crime was more prevalent. She acknowledged his point, recalling that in Shibuya, small fights broke out daily. The mention of Shibuya piqued her interest, and she asked if he meant the one in Tokyo. He confirmed it, and she realized they would need to take the bullet train from Kofu to Shinjuku, passing through Hosu City. She hadn't received any messages from Todoroki about Ida, indicating he hadn't seen him yet. Todoroki had been texting her occasionally to check on her internship, and she had come to see him as a decent person despite his personal issues, particularly with his father. His internship seemed to be going well, according to him, but her concern for Ida lingered. Meanwhile, Ida was having a conversation with Manuel. He felt uneasy when Manuel asked if he was after the hero killer. Ida froze, unsure how to respond. Manuel explained that he couldn't think of another reason for Ida's presence at his agency and mentioned receiving a message from a mutual acquaintance. When Ida inquired about the friend, Manuel revealed it was Midoriya. Ida was surprised to learn that Midoriya and Manuel had crossed paths before, especially during a time when Midoriya was wanted by the police. Manuel expressed his concern for Ida's safety, emphasizing that heroes shouldn't act on personal grudges. Ida agreed, acknowledging that seeking revenge was not the path of a true hero. Manuel seemed relieved and noted that Midoriya cared about Ida, frequently checking in on him. Later, a green-haired boy playfully teased Ida, prompting him to approach despite his hesitation. He introduced himself as Ida Tenya and extended his hand for a shake, which the boy accepted with a smile. In another moment, Ida found himself reprimanding Midoriya for swearing in front of their classmates, insisting that it was unbecoming of a hero in training. Midoriya, with a smirk, attempted to see things from Ida's perspective but humorously remarked on the difficulty of doing so. Some classmates laughed, causing Ida to feel embarrassed. Midoriya then encouraged Ida not to take it personally and expressed a desire to become friends, although he humorously mentioned that Ida's lack of swearing made him uncomfortable. Later, Ida encountered Midoriya again, relieved it was him and not a teacher. Midoriya reassured him that there would be more opportunities to participate in future sports festivals. When Ida hesitated, Midoriya urged him to go see his brother and offered to inform Aizawa that something had come up. As Ida turned to leave, Midoriya expressed his condolences regarding Ida's brother. Ida insisted there was no need for apologies, as Midoriya had nothing to do with the situation. When asked about his brother's well-being, Ida responded that he was fine, holding back the full truth. As he began to walk away, Midoriya gently reminded him that revenge was never the solution. Deku observed the late hour and expressed concern to Torino about him falling asleep. Torino dismissed the idea, insisting that nighttime brought more crime activity. Deku shook his head and checked his phone, explaining that he was keeping in touch with Manuel, a hero under whom one of his friends was interning. Torino found it odd that Deku was texting, but Deku clarified that they had a mutual relationship and that his friend sought revenge for his brother, prompting Deku to keep an eye on him. Just then, a passenger shouted about a building explosion, causing confusion among the crowd. Smoke was visible in the distance, and the train attendant urged everyone to hold on to their seats. The train came to a sudden stop, and Deku was thrown against the seat in front of him. He quickly got up to see a hero struggling against a creature known as a Nomu. Deku recognized the danger and attempted to intervene, but Torino urged him to stay back and focus on the passengers. Before Deku could argue, Torino leaped into action, kicking the Nomu out of the train and using his quirk to send it crashing into a building. Deku rushed to the hole in the train, ready to follow, but was taken aback by the sight before him. Meanwhile, Ida was racing alongside Manuel, who informed him about the presence of villains. Ida felt a sense of dread, suspecting that the hero killer might be involved, but he knew that this situation was different. As they ran, Ida spotted an alley and took off in that direction, thinking that any chaos would be hidden from public view. Suddenly, he confronted a figure in a hero costume who dismissed him as a mere child. Ida recognized the hero killer, Stain, and confronted him, fueled by anger and a desire for vengeance. Stain taunted him, warning him to be careful with his words. Ida stood firm, declaring his identity as the younger brother of a hero Stain had attacked, vowing to uphold his brother's legacy. Back at the train, Deku was alarmed by the chaos outside. He urged everyone to remain calm while preparing to leave the train. He donned his mask and leaped into action, realizing that the Nomu attacking them was different and more menacing than the one he had faced before. With determination, he activated his telekinesis and flew toward the chaos, landing near a group of Nomus. Manuel and other heroes were struggling against the creatures, and Deku quickly joined the fray, using his powers to help. He shouted for Manuel to extinguish the fire, but a hero dismissed him, thinking he was in the way. Deku, frustrated by the misunderstanding, pushed past and engaged a Nomu, using his abilities to subdue it. Afterward, he approached Manuel, who was searching for their missing friend, Prez. Manuel explained that he had lost sight of Prez while running past some alleys, and Deku's frustration grew at the thought of his friend being in danger. Ida, feeling the weight of his actions, reflected on his confrontation with Stain. He wished for a chance to be scolded by Midoriya, longing for the familiar dynamic they shared. The title of Prez felt heavy with guilt, reminding him of the reckless path he had taken. He grappled with the reality that seeking revenge was not the way of a true hero, and he questioned his own worthiness in the face of such darkness. I doubted I would have been praised. Instead, I would have faced expulsion or possibly even arrest. I looked at Todoroki, who stared at me with a blank expression. Midoriya limped over to the hero Stain had attacked and helped him up. The hero insisted on carrying Midoriya, but he refused. After some light bickering, Midoriya agreed to use the hero as support to walk. None of them looked at me. Todoroki had grabbed some rope and tied Stain up. All of Stain's weapons lay on the ground, out of his reach in case he woke up. I followed the others as they walked out of the alley. Todoroki dragged Stain by the rope, while Midoriya and the hero limped together, using one another for support. I kept my head down, filled with guilt, embarrassment, and utter shame as I trailed behind. When we exited the alley, we heard voices yelling. A woman shouted that she had found us. It turned out that Todoroki's father had sent some heroes to our location, including the hero Midoriya had intended to work under. The older hero yelled at Midoriya for not staying on the train. Midoriya retorted that he had done his job watching the passengers and then went to where there was a city on fire. They continued their exchange before Midoriya apologized, and the older hero grinned, shaking his head. He remarked that Midoriya had the heart of a true hero. Midoriya corrected him with a small smile, stating his name, and the older hero responded casually. Midoriya stopped using the hero as support when an ambulance arrived, allowing the hero to enter first. He explained that the hero was injured when they arrived and should be treated first. The hero then asked what had happened to us kids. Todoroki stepped aside to show the hero's Stain, wrapped in rope and unconscious. They stared at him in horror, expressing disbelief that we were just kids. Midoriya held out his hand, introducing himself as Japan's savior and the best hero, Deku. The hero was taken aback, questioning how a kid like him could have been involved, but Midoriya shrugged it off, stating it was a long story. As Midoriya began explaining what had happened, Todoroki suddenly shouted for him to duck. Midoriya was confused, wondering if there were ducks around, but before he could finish, he was lifted into the air by a Nomu. Midoriya yelled in frustration as he was hoisted upward. In an instant, the Nomu began to free fall, and Midoriya screamed. A knife zoomed past and struck the Nomu, taking it down. It landed on the ground, and Midoriya lay motionless a short distance away. Stain stood in front of the fallen creature, his movements sluggish but his presence commanding. No one moved or spoke, we all stared at him. He took a breath and began yelling that the hero society had fallen, declaring that no heroes were true anymore and that they were all fakes. He proclaimed that the only true heroes left in the world were All Might and Deku, but then he stopped mid-sentence, frozen in place. From Deku's perspective, his leg was in terrible shape. He realized he wouldn't just return to his normal life with a few scrapes and bruises. Instead, he had encountered a whole new world with a Nomu and had been saved by the hero killer. The word about Stain was that a broken rib had pierced his lung, meaning he wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. After the incident, Todoroki, Prez, and I were taken to the hospital. Among us, Todoroki was the least injured, having only sustained a few jabs in the arm and some scratches. Prez had a messed up arm and some blood loss, but he would be fine for now. I didn't want to brag, but I was probably the most injured of the three. My leg had been stabbed multiple times, and a few of my ribs were broken from the Nomu. A day after being in the hospital, the chief of police visited us. He asked if we were the ones who had taken out the hero killer. When I questioned his interest, he informed us that we had disobeyed our hero's orders and used our quirks without permission. Todoroki looked outraged, arguing that they couldn't just sit back while their friend was attacked. The chief pointed out that Midoriya had gone looking for the hero killer, and Todoroki fell silent. The chief sighed, stating he wasn't there to arrest us but to offer a deal. He presented two options: take credit for defeating the hero killer and face jail time for using our quirks without approval, or give all the credit to Deku and say we were attacked by the hero killer while he saved us. Prez muttered that this was basically what had happened. I opted for the second option, not wanting to see what the others thought. The chief thanked us for what we had done before turning to leave. I sighed and flopped onto my bed, feeling bored. I reached for my phone, but there were still no new messages. I was relieved, not wanting my mom or Katsuki to text me. I didn't want them to know about this at all. Katsuki would be furious that I hadn't told him about Ida, as I had with Todoroki, and my mom would be upset that I had almost died. As the three of us sat in awkward silence, I broke the tension by asking Prez if he had learned his lesson. He quietly affirmed that he had. I pressed him for what he had learned, and he replied that revenge wasn't the answer and that he shouldn't act on selfish reasons. I acknowledged his insight. The silence returned, and I attempted to get off the bed. As soon as I put weight on my leg, I fell. I exclaimed in frustration, and Todoroki asked what I was doing. I declared my intention to return to Gran Torino to continue my internship. Midoriya was determined not to waste time sitting idly in the hospital. He stood up, feeling the weight of his injuries but refusing to let them hold him back. Ida, concerned for his friend, reminded him that he could barely walk and shouldn't return to his internship just yet. Midoriya, feeling a surge of defiance, snapped back at Ida, insisting that he could make his own choices. He made his way slowly to the bathroom, changing out of the hospital gown into a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt he had found. Once he felt more like himself, he limped back into the room, trying to conceal his discomfort. After leaving the room, he approached the front desk, where a nurse called out to him. When she asked who he had been visiting, he politely informed her that he had been with his classmates who had recently faced the hero killer, Stain. He mentioned Ida, Todoroki, and himself, and the nurse expressed her sympathy for his friends. Midoriya reassured her that it was fortunate he had been nearby to help. After a brief exchange, he waved goodbye and exited the hospital, ready to make the most of his remaining days before returning to UA. Later, he reflected on his time with Gran Torino during his internship. Although they hadn't done much, it was a welcome change from the hospital. Gran Torino downplayed his contributions, but Midoriya acknowledged that he had learned a lot. As he prepared to leave, Gran Torino asked how he was doing, and Midoriya playfully insisted on using his full name. Gran Torino dismissed it, leading to a light-hearted exchange before Midoriya walked away, mumbling about old people's farewells. Pulling out his phone, he watched a news report about his alter ego, Vigilante Deku, who had recently taken down the hero killer while saving 2 heroes in training and a pro hero. Despite the praise, Midoriya felt a mix of emotions, admitting to himself that he had been terrified during the encounter. The next day, he encountered his classmates, who were teasing Katsuki about his hair. Katsuki, frustrated, threatened them, but the laughter only intensified. As the conversation shifted to internships, Denki asked Midoriya about the news surrounding him, and the class turned their attention to him. Momo expressed her concern for his well-being, noting that he hadn't responded to any messages. Midoriya sheepishly admitted he had hoped they would forget. The discussion turned to the implications of Stain's actions and his connection to the League of Villains. Some classmates expressed fascination with Stain, prompting a debate about the morality of his beliefs. Just then, their class president announced it was time to begin their lesson, and the atmosphere shifted back to seriousness. Later in the day, All Might arrived, announcing a rescue training race. He explained the setup of the obstacle course, which would test their skills in a competitive environment. Midoriya felt a mix of excitement and apprehension as he prepared to face off against his classmates, knowing that he had to give it his all despite the challenges ahead. As they entered the maze, Midoriya felt confident, determined to prove himself in this new trial. He was ready to show everyone that he could rise to the occasion, even with the obstacles in his path. Izuku wore a confident grin on his face. Momo remarked that Midoriya seemed to be at a disadvantage. The thought struck me as odd. Deku at a disadvantage? That seemed unlikely. Earphones chimed in, expressing uncertainty about how things would unfold. Shitty Hair declared his belief that Zero would win, while Denki admitted he was rooting for Ojiro. Grape placed his bet on Ishido, citing her athleticism, but I confidently stated my support for Deku. Uraraka believed that even if he was injured, Ida had a good chance. With a loud command from All Might, the competition began, and a horn sounded. We focused on the screen, where Zero was in the lead, Mina was sliding on the pipes, Ojiro was using his tail to jump, and Ida was running well despite his recent injury. However, Deku was nowhere to be seen. The camera shifted back to Zero, who proudly held the first-place title. Shitty Hair shouted in excitement, convinced that Zero would win. In an instant, the title beside Zero changed to second place, and the horn sounded again. Denki expressed his confusion about what had happened. The screen then revealed All Might hiding, with Deku standing next to him, still wearing that confident grin. All Might announced that the winner was Midoriya, and I smirked at the class, feeling vindicated. Later, All Might congratulated Deku for his performance, handing him a sash. Deku nodded and tucked it into his pocket. All Might then turned to the other 4 competitors, praising their improvements and encouraging them to prepare for their final exams. They responded with enthusiasm, while Deku remained distracted. All Might called for the next group, and as the others began to leave, he stopped Deku to commend him once more. Deku thanked him, and All Might requested a private meeting after class. This prompted a mix of apprehension and curiosity in Deku as he returned to his classmates. As they entered the locker room to change out of their hero outfits, Sato commented on the tough training. Conversations about personal improvements filled the air. Deku recalled the exciting races, particularly when Tsuyu managed to outpace Katsuki at the last moment, leaving a memorable expression on his face. Suddenly, Mineta caught Deku's attention, excitedly claiming he had found something incredible. He pointed to a small hole in the wall that had been concealed by paper. Mineta proclaimed it a gift from the previous generation, revealing that it led to the girls' locker room. Prez quickly reprimanded him, warning that peeping was a crime. Mineta, undeterred, insisted he would take the risk, tearing the paper away and drooling at the prospect. As he approached the hole, an earphone jack suddenly pierced his eye, causing him to scream. Deku couldn't help but laugh, finding the situation amusing. Meanwhile, Jiro, in the girls' locker room, paused her changing when she heard Mineta's voice. She asked Hagakure if she had heard it too. After confirming it was Mineta, she plugged one of her earphone jacks into the wall to listen. The conversation revealed Mineta's intentions, prompting Jiro to react with disgust. She quickly shoved her other jack into the hole, hearing Mineta's scream followed by Deku's laughter. Jiro informed Uraraka about Mineta's antics, and Yaoyorozu expressed her disapproval, suggesting they close the hole immediately. Jiro wondered why Mineta hadn't said anything about her. Later, as Deku left the classroom, Todoroki questioned his departure just as the bell rang. Deku explained he needed to check in with Nizu about his patrols, and Todoroki nodded before walking away. Upon entering the meeting room, Deku was startled to see All Might in his smaller form, sitting alongside Mirio. All Might invited him to take a seat, and Deku settled in, curious about the purpose of the meeting. Mirio explained that they wanted to discuss One for All in greater detail. Deku questioned why he needed to know more about it, given that it was Mirio's quirk. All Might interjected, noting that recent events with the hero killer and the League made it clear that Deku was a target for villains. Deku, leaning back in his chair, reminded them that he had always been a target due to his vigilantism. All Might acknowledged this but warned of a greater villain they were concerned about. All for One had never crossed my mind before. With a name like that, it was obvious he had something to do with One for All. The names were practically reversed. I sighed, not wanting to get entangled in All Might's problems, no matter how selfish it might sound. The hero killer was already a significant issue, and I had planned to ignore him until things escalated. But I knew that eventually, my curiosity would get the better of me, and I would seek out Mirio. However, with everything going on with patrols and final exams, I had too much on my plate to deal with one more complication. I decided to focus on final exams first, then learn more about this All for One character. Mirio had said I was a hero, just like the rest of Japan. But I saw myself differently. I was just a guy trying to take control of my own fate, not a hero. As the day progressed, Aizawa announced that there was only 1 week left until final exams. He reminded everyone to keep studying and training, emphasizing that the written exam was only one part of the overall assessment. Denki and Mina expressed their concerns about not having taken enough notes this semester. They were both capable in hero training but struggled academically. While Mina shrugged it off, Denki was in a panic. Tokoyami agreed, pointing out that they hadn't learned much before their midterms. Sato shared his worries about the upcoming exams, noting that they likely wouldn't hold back. Mineta, who had ranked in the top 10, boasted about his position, which only made me roll my eyes at his arrogance. I sighed and told Denki and Mina that if they wanted to attend the training camp, they would need to find someone to help them catch up. They looked at me with pleading eyes, but I declined, stating I was too busy. As class representative, Ida expressed his hopes for everyone to make UA proud, while Todoroki added that it was hard to fail if one paid attention in class. Denki groaned about their comments, feeling targeted. Yaoyorozu offered to help with important topics, although she lamented that she wouldn't be able to assist with the practical part of the exams. I could see her confidence had waned since the sports festival, which saddened me because her quirk was incredibly useful. Jiro approached Yaoyorozu, asking for help with quadratic functions, followed by Shiro, who struggled with classical Japanese. Ojiro joined in, expressing his need for assistance as well. Excited by the prospect of helping, Yaoyorozu proposed a study session at her residence over the weekend. The others were thrilled at the idea, and Mina eagerly anticipated visiting Yaoyorozu's fancy house. As Yaoyorozu enthusiastically shared her plans, Kirishima joked about studying with her, while Katsuki grumbled about the need to beat lessons into others. Despite my irritation at Katsuki's higher ranking, I knew he was a dedicated student who studied relentlessly. Aoyama, feeling the pressure, sighed about the panic surrounding the exams, while Shoji pointed out that Aoyama hadn't performed well in the midterms. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of anxiety and determination as we all prepared for the challenges ahead. He defended himself, stating he was doing just fine. Shoji Mezu had ranked 12th out of 20 in the midterms. Sighing, I closed my notebook, which contained everyone's midterm scores. I kept track of this information for a reason. After gathering my things, I joined the rest of the class heading to lunch. Uraraka, taking a seat in front of me with Azui, expressed her concern about the upcoming final exam. She was ranked 13th out of 20 in the midterms. I shrugged, assuring her that it would likely cover material we had already discussed in class, so I wasn't too worried. Next to me, Prez nodded in agreement, suggesting that the exam wouldn't be too difficult. Uraraka, still skeptical, questioned whether we really thought it would be that simple. I clarified that I never claimed it would be easy, I just wasn't overly anxious about it. My main concern was what we would be doing for the practical exam. Hagakure chimed in, explaining that it would cover everything we had learned that year, a sentiment Azui echoed. Hagakure had ranked 15th out of 20, while Azui had performed better, coming in 6th. Uraraka speculated that the practical would involve combat, rescue, and the basics. Just as I began to respond, an elbow unexpectedly struck my face. Apologizing, the medium-height blonde boy claimed my head had been in his way. I looked him over, recognizing him as a member of Class 1B. I expressed my distaste, pointing out that he was the one with the copying quirk. He glared back, acknowledging me as the vigilante who had taken down the hero killer. He continued, criticizing Class 1A for always seeking attention, suggesting that our actions could lead to trouble for others. Before he could finish his thought, another Class 1B student intervened, smacking him and causing him to fall. She quickly caught his food tray before it could hit the ground. Scolding him, she turned to us and apologized for his behavior. Monoma lay limp beside her, which made me smirk slightly. After Aizawa and the teachers left, everyone paired off to strategize. Meanwhile, Deku headed to the monitoring room to observe the exams. Recovery Girl greeted him as he entered, expressing her hope to see him there. When Deku inquired if she was fighting, she laughed, explaining that she was there in case things got a little out of hand. He nodded in understanding. As he settled in, Uraraka walked in, and Deku acknowledged her presence. He explained that he was watching the teachers to learn their fighting styles, which would help him in his exam. Uraraka agreed that it was smart thinking and asked about his friends. Deku mentioned that Aoyama was preoccupied and Bakugu had walked away before he could speak with him. He offered to give Uraraka some pointers since they were up against 13, but she decided to gather inspiration from other battles first. The monitor lit up, displaying the exam ground as the automatic voice announced the start of the first match, Team Red Riot and Sugarman against Cementos. Deku sighed, recognizing their ambition in attempting to fight Cementos. While Cementos couldn't move much, he compensated with his ability to defend and attack from a fixed position. Deku noted that Kirishima and Sato, with their similar quirks, were wasting energy trying to capture Cementos instead of focusing on a more strategic approach. As the match progressed, it became clear that Kirishima and Sato were tiring from breaking through the cement walls, ultimately leading to their defeat. A buzzer rang, signaling the end of the match, and Recovery Girl sighed, preparing to assist. Deku noted the outcome in his notebook, realizing Aizawa had a keen understanding of the challenges. He continued to take notes on subsequent matches, observing strategies and weaknesses. The second match featured Azui and Tokoyami against Ectoplasm, which ended in success. Deku noted Ectoplasm's use of clones and combat skills. The third match, involving Prez and Ojiro against Power Loader, also succeeded, with Deku recognizing Power Loader's advantage in underground combat. The fourth match saw Todoroki and Yaoyorozu against Erasure Head, where they exploited his limitations due to injuries. As Deku finished documenting the fourth match, Uraraka asked about his notes. He confirmed they were going well and noted that her match was next. She wished him luck before heading out. The automatic voice announced the start of the next match, Team Bakugu, Uravity, and Can't Stop Twinkling against 13. This match was particularly engaging, as 13 used her quirk to try and capture the trio. Deku observed the dynamics, noting how Bakugu initially attempted to go solo but ended up in a precarious situation. Uraraka found herself trapped, trying to hold on as 13 blocked their escape. Aoyama interrupted her thoughts, teasing her about Midoriya. Just then, an explosion startled them, and Bakugu reacted in disbelief, losing his grip. In a moment of quick thinking, Uraraka let go of her hold and used her quirk to lift Bakugo, coordinating their efforts to pin 13 down. With a shout, she instructed Bakugo to go for 13 once she released him. As he launched himself toward 13, he unleashed an explosion to immobilize her, successfully applying the HNDCFFS. Aoyama celebrated their victory, and Bakugo rolled his eyes at his teammates' enthusiasm. As they exited, the buzzer rang, announcing their success in the finals. Deku couldn't help but laugh at the expression on Bakugo's face, curious about what Aoyama had said to make him let go. Azui joined him in the room, providing good company as they awaited the next match. Just then, Prez and Yaoyorozu entered, ready to share their experiences. Uraraka and Bakugo had emerged victorious, which was not surprising. Ida approached with a smile, accompanied by Yaoyorozu. I nodded in agreement, congratulating them on their success. Azui riveted in agreement, adding to the moment. Prez expressed his appreciation, noting how much it meant coming from me. The buzzer rang again, signaling the start of the next match. The automated voice announced the pairing, Team Chargebolt and Pinky against the principal. We watched in silence as Denki and Mina faced off against Nizu. Despite his small size, Nizu proved to be a formidable opponent, using his cunning to outmaneuver Denki and Mina, ultimately leading them to run out of time. Recovery Girl explained that Nizu had been mistreated by humans in the past, and now he sought his revenge, laughing maniacally at the chaos he was creating. As the buzzer sounded, indicating their failure, I remarked on how unfortunate it was for them. Prez noted that they never even got a chance to see Nizu in action. Just then, Uraraka entered, surprised to learn that the match had already concluded. She expressed disbelief at their loss, while Yaoyorozu lamented how flawless Nizu's strategy had been. Uraraka was disheartened, recalling how much Denki and Mina had looked forward to the training camp. Prez quickly shifted the conversation, congratulating Uraraka on her success. She beamed, thanking everyone for their support. Azui inquired about what Aoyama had said to Uraraka and Bakugo, but Uraraka hesitated, her cheeks flushing as she panicked, insisting it was nothing important. The buzzer sounded again, and the 7th match commenced. I felt sympathy for Jiro and Koda, who were up against Present Mic. The noise from Yamahata was overwhelming, and even Jiro's advanced hearing made the situation unbearable. Koda struggled to use his quirk as Yamahata's shouting scared away all the animals. Minutes later, Present Mic found himself covered in bugs, revealing Koda's ability to communicate with them. Recovery Girl expressed her disapproval, while Yaoyorozu covered her mouth in disgust. I couldn't help but grin at the unexpected turn of events. The automated voice announced that Team Earphone Jack and Anima had passed the finals. I rushed over to congratulate Jiro and Koda as they entered the monitoring room, praising their brilliant performance. Jiro was surprised by my compliment, while Koda blushed and nodded in appreciation. The 8th match ended quickly, with Hagikure's invisibility and Shoji's distraction tactics proving effective against Snipe. Afterward, I left the monitoring room and made my way to my exam area, opting not to watch the 9th match between Mineta and Siro against Midnight, knowing it would be a challenging one. As I waited for the buzzer to signal their failure, I felt a mix of hope and doubt. A few minutes later, the announcement came that Team Grape Juice and Cellophane had passed the finals, leaving me impressed. The automated voice called for Team Deku to enter the practical exam area. I stepped through the doors into a simulated city, smiling as I donned my mask, ready for the challenge ahead. Bakugo's perspective shifted as he heard the announcement for exam. He wondered why he had to attend when Deku was supposed to be fighting all the teachers. After getting up from his bench, he joined the others at the entrance, where Mr. Aizawa explained the last-minute change in plans. Due to my keen observations during their exams, it was decided that my classmates would face me instead, with the objective of stopping me from reaching the gate. As the buzzer sounded, the doors opened, and everyone hesitated before Denki charged in, excited for the training camp. Bakugo's motivation was clear, he wanted to take me down. From my vantage point atop the tallest building in the fake city, I spotted my classmates running in a group below. Kirishima shouted for me, and Yaoyorozu suggested splitting up to find me more easily. I couldn't help but feel frustrated, I had hoped for a more straightforward challenge against the teachers instead of facing my entire class. Midoriya found himself in a predicament, reluctant to confront his classmates. A voice called out from behind him, and he recognized it as Shoji, who had used his quirk to locate him. In a swift motion, Midoriya retrieved a pair of HNDCFFS from his pocket and, using his telekinesis, secured them onto the floating mouth behind him. 1 down, 18 more to go. He couldn't deny that Aizawa had pinpointed his weakness, his reluctance to fight his friends. Midoriya rolled his eyes, realizing that to succeed, he would have to view them as opponents rather than allies. The individuals he needed to be most cautious of were Jiro and Hagakure, now that Shoji was out of the picture. He leaped from the top of the building, descending rapidly, and used his telekinesis to cushion his landing. Hiding on rooftops was no longer a viable strategy. He recalled that the exit gate was where the teachers had entered during previous exams. As he considered running toward the gate, he hesitated. Surely, someone would be stationed there to guard it. He needed a distraction. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his notebook and tore out several clean pages. Lowering his mask, he crumpled the pages into ball and ignited them, using his telekinesis to enlarge them into massive fireballs. He sent them soaring in different directions, igniting several buildings in the process. Midoriya chuckled to himself, pleased with his accomplishment as he heard the distant shouts of his classmates. He sprinted toward the direction they had come from, stopping when he caught sight of the gate. Standing guard was none other than Bakugo Katsuki, holding a walkie-talkie likely crafted by Yaoyorozu. Yaoyorozu's voice crackled through the device, urgently asking if he could hear her. Bakugo rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed, and grumbled in response. She informed him that Midoriya had set several buildings ablaze and requested his assistance. Bakugo glanced around, muttering that he would be there shortly and instructed someone to take his place. A smirk crossed Midoriya's face. As soon as Bakugo left, he would be in the clear. Bakugo shoved the walkie-talkie into his pocket and looked around again, warning Midoriya that if he left without confronting him, there would be consequences. Before he could finish, Yaoyorozu called out again, urging him to come help. With a burst of explosions, Bakugo launched himself into the air, heading toward the flames. Once Bakugo was out of sight, Midoriya cautiously approached the gate. Just a few feet from victory, he paused as Bakugo's voice echoed in his mind. He sighed and stepped back, turning to face the city. "This is going to hurt," he murmured. With a wave of his hand, he used his telekinesis to collapse the buildings around him, sending debris crashing to the ground. He ignited his arms in flames and directed the fire toward the rubble, setting it ablaze. A few feet away, Mineta stood frozen in fear, clutching a walkie-talkie. Midoriya seized it with his telekinesis and swiftly placed HNDCFFS on him. He pressed the button on the device and spoke into it, announcing his unexpected encounter with Mineta and how easily he had subdued him. He mentioned that he was waiting at the gate. Moments later, he spotted the entire class rushing toward him. He scanned the crowd for Hagakure and, upon spotting her floating gloves, used his telekinesis to secure her in HNDCFFS. With 3 captured, he now faced 16 classmates approaching him. Jiro was no longer a concern, as everyone knew his location. He used the debris around him to create barriers, preventing them from advancing, inflicting only minor injuries. Counting the classmates trapped beneath the rubble, he noted 13. He searched for the 3 missing, Katsuki, Denki, and Tokoyami. It was unusual for Katsuki to stray from the group, but Denki and Tokoyami's absence was surprising. Suddenly, he heard Katsuki's voice call out, commanding Dark Shadow to attack. Midoriya pulled down his mask and unleashed flames toward Dark Shadow, exploiting its weakness to light. He quickly produced another pair of HNDCFFS and secured Dark Shadow. Now, only Denki and Katsuki remained, and time was running short. Midoriya contemplated simply walking out. "Stun grenade!" Katsuki shouted from behind him. Midoriya had anticipated this moment. He closed his eyes to shield himself from the bright light and sensed movement in front of him. He instinctively reached out, grabbing Katsuki's face. Katsuki protested, attempting to break free and retaliate with explosions. Rather than retreating, he fought back fiercely. Midoriya, using his other hand, seized Katsuki's arm and swung him over his shoulder, slamming him to the ground. He quickly retrieved the HNDCFFS and secured them on Katsuki. "How was that for half-hearted?" he remarked, releasing his grip on Katsuki's face. The explosive hero lay still, knocked out. With Denki still unaccounted for, Midoriya turned and walked through the gate just as the buzzer sounded. Team Deku has passed the practical exam. They never stood a chance. The exams were finally over, and only 4 people had failed: Denki, Mina, Sato, and Kirishima. Their disappointment was palpable, with Mina in tears. Midoriya tried to comfort them, suggesting that Aizawa might have a twist in store that would allow them to attend the training camp. Shiro cautioned against getting their hopes up, reminding everyone of the strict rules regarding the camp and the practical exam failures. Denki expressed his frustration, feeling cornered by their situation. Kirishima added to the gloom by mentioning their second chance, which they had also failed. Midoriya, confused, learned that Aizawa had promised them credit if they could stop him from winning the exam. Denki blamed Midoriya for the failure, but Shiro defended him, pointing out that they all shared the same goal. Just then, Aizawa entered the classroom, announcing that everyone would be going to the training camp despite the failures. The mood shifted dramatically as Kirishima and Mina expressed their excitement. Aizawa explained that the purpose of the practical exam was to assess teamwork and skills, and those who had failed would benefit the most from the camp's lessons. Ida raised a concern about trust, but Aizawa assured them that while they would all attend, the 5 who failed would face extra challenges. As the bell rang, Aizawa dismissed the class, and Ojiro noted the positive aspect of everyone going to the camp. Ida read from the information packet, revealing they would be there for a whole week. Hagakure suggested a trip to the mall, and the class eagerly agreed, except for Katsuki, who declined with his usual bluntness. Midoriya called out to his mother as he prepared to leave, but she stopped him, questioning his casual attire. He explained the mall trip and reassured her that it was just a class outing. After a brief exchange, he left, meeting Katsuki at the train stop. Katsuki's initial reluctance faded as they boarded the train together, with Midoriya teasing him about wanting to hang out with the class. Katsuki dismissed the idea but mentioned wanting to beat Midoriya at the arcade. Upon arriving at the mall, Denki spotted them and called out. Kirishima welcomed Katsuki, who insisted he was only there to compete with Midoriya. Kirishima, acting as class representative, encouraged everyone to behave well and proposed they split up and reconvene later. As the groups formed, Midoriya found himself alone, contemplating what to do. While wandering, he felt an arm on his shoulder and instinctively reacted, thinking it was Katsuki. However, it was someone else who introduced themselves as a fan. Midoriya expressed his discomfort, and the stranger removed their arm, only to grab Midoriya's throat playfully. Recognizing the person, Midoriya greeted them with a mix of annoyance and familiarity. He recognized the roughness of the hands gripping him tightly. The figure leaned in closer, stating that if he provided the information he sought, he would be released. If not, there might be consequences. The tension in the air was palpable as he tightened his hold. The response was a mix of sarcasm and bravado, acknowledging the offer but not taking it seriously. He was pulled over to a nearby bench, where he expressed his displeasure at being handled so roughly, insisting that he wouldn't run away. The figure pressed on, asking about a recent encounter with the notorious villain. He confirmed the confrontation, adding that he had managed to defeat the villain, who he thought was affiliated with his captor. The response was dismissive, revealing a frustration about the public's obsession with the villain while ignoring the chaos he had caused. He challenged the captive to consider the difference between them, to which the captive replied that they shared a common trait: insanity. The figure warned him not to joke around, threatening to reduce him to dust. The captive felt a surge of confidence, knowing he could easily overpower his captor with his abilities. He was curious to see how the situation would unfold. He reflected on the ideals of the villain he had faced, contrasting them with the motivations of his captor. The villain had sought to make a difference, while his captor seemed driven by hatred and a desire for attention. He sensed that his words might have angered the figure, but the grip on his neck remained firm and silent. Later, he found himself reminiscing about the previous night, which had been uneventful. He had gone to Hosu after hearing about the crime rates, only to find them exaggerated. It seemed that villains were avoiding chaos now that he was around. Earlier that day, 2 classmates had shown up at his door, eager to invite him to the pool. He declined, aware of their ulterior motives. Instead, he informed another friend about the open pool, which led to a flurry of excitement among their classmates. As they arrived at the pool, he was greeted by the sight of his classmates, all gathered for a training session. They were surprised to see him, and he learned that he had inadvertently helped organize the gathering. The atmosphere was lively, with everyone in their school swimsuits. As they took a break from training, one classmate lamented how he had ruined their plans by not joining them. Another defended their decision to reach out to him, leading to a light-hearted exchange about teamwork. One of his classmates handed another a drink, and they discussed how the idea for the gathering had originated from him. It was amusing to think about how their friendship had developed, especially considering their initial impressions of each other. As they continued to chat, another classmate made a humorous remark about swearing, which sparked laughter among the group. They reminisced about their first day together, highlighting the camaraderie that had formed. Suddenly, he appeared, arms crossed and a smirk on his face. He had arrived later than expected but was met with enthusiasm from his classmates. He suggested a race, which excited everyone, and they quickly agreed to participate. When asked if he was wearing a swimsuit, he revealed his school swim shorts, drawing attention to the marks on his legs. He brushed off the question with a laugh, attributing the marks to a past encounter with the familiar foe. Just then, a frustrated voice interrupted, expressing annoyance at the unexpected arrivals. The atmosphere shifted as they recognized the source of the tension, leaving everyone feeling a bit awkward. Midoriya clapped his hands together, outlining the rules for their upcoming activity. They could use their quirks since they were at school, but there would be no sabotaging others and no destruction of property. Just as he finished, Bakugo appeared out of nowhere, declaring his intent to defeat Midoriya once again. Midoriya rolled his eyes, reminding Bakugo that he had already beaten him multiple times. Stepping between them, I suggested they settle their rivalry with a race instead. Later, Midoriya returned home, his eyes stinging from chlorine and water still lingering in his ears. Katsuki had used his quirk to avoid getting wet, leading to a scuffle that ended with both of them in the water. It had been chaotic, and Midoriya decided he would avoid hanging out with the class if he could help it. Aizawa had come to tell them to leave since they had overstayed their time at the pool. Once home, he turned on the TV, where the news was dominated by coverage of the USJ incident and the events in Hosu. They praised Midoriya for his role in taking down Stain, which frustrated him. It had been a month since the incident, yet it still made headlines. With a sigh, he headed to his room to pack for the training camp. He grabbed his bag from the doorknob, tipping it upside down to empty its contents onto his bed. School books, papers, and pencils scattered across the surface. He neatly set aside the school supplies and opened his closet to check his clothes. His wardrobe was limited, as he rarely ventured out unless it was for vigilante work. He mostly wore whatever he slept in, not caring about appearances. The only workout clothes he had were a t-shirt that humorously said, "T-shirt," and 2 pairs of shorts. Frustrated, he turned away from the closet, realizing his current outfit, a dark green shirt and light gray jeans, wasn't suitable for training. He decided to pack a pair of pajama pants and the t-shirt, needing just a couple more shirts and sweatpants to be ready. After leaving a note for his mom about going out to buy clothes, he took some cash he had acquired from his encounters with villains. At the mall, he successfully found 2 shirts, a new sweatshirt, shorts, sweatpants, and a notebook, even having some cash left over. The best part was that he managed to shop without any interruptions from troublesome villains. It had turned out to be a good day. Upon returning home, his mom greeted him, curious about the bags he carried. Midoriya casually mentioned that he had bought clothes for the camp. She jokingly warned him not to have purchased another shirt that simply said, "T-shirt." With a smirk, he assured her he hadn't, then revealed the sweatshirt he had bought that humorously said, "Sweatshirt." She sighed, shaking her head at his choice. After unpacking his new items and adding essentials like socks and toiletries to his bag, His mom reminded him that his training camp started the next day. She urged him to go to bed early, emphasizing that he shouldn't risk getting injured before the camp. After a brief standoff, he reluctantly agreed, turning to head to his room while she called after him to avoid staying up too late. The next day, Aizawa instructed the class to take a break and exit the bus. They found themselves parked on a cliff in a remote area. As they disembarked, Midoriya noticed two figures by the railing. Aizawa approached them, and the class followed, recognizing the pro-hero group known as the Wild Pussycats. Mandalay greeted them and pointed out the land they owned, indicating where their camp was located amidst the trees. Uraraka questioned why they had stopped at the cliff, and Midoriya, sensing the tension, suggested they all knew the reason. As nervousness spread among the class, Siro slowly backed away, claiming he had forgotten something on the bus. Mandalay smiled, informing them that if they hurried, they could reach the camp by noon. In a panic, Kirishima shouted for everyone to save themselves as the class rushed back to the bus. Midoriya stayed behind, watching as his classmates scrambled away. It's no use trying to run with Pixie Bob's quirk. The ground shakes, and the class gets caught up in her avalanche. I use my telekinesis to keep myself in the air while the rest of the class falls. Pixie Bob expresses her approval as she, Mandalay, and Aizawa watch me. Aizawa sighs, and his hair begins to levitate. Ida helps me up, asking what happened as I brush dirt off my shirt. I mention that Aizawa erased my quirk while pulling a twig out of my hair. When he erased it, I fell, but at the last moment, I redirected myself into a tree to soften my landing. Kaminari wonders what we should do next, and Kirishima suggests finding the camp since there's nothing else we can do. Suddenly, a high-pitched scream pierces the air. I turn to see Mineta in front of a huge earth creature. I express my frustration with Pixie Bob's quirk while using my telekinesis to grab Mineta. Panic erupts as Kaminari and Siro scream about our impending doom. Kuda tries to use his quirk on the monster, and while I admire his bravery, I know this isn't an animal. I release my hold on Mineta, and he tumbles to the ground, yelling for a warning next time. I glance at the class, wondering if they can handle this situation. I'm tired from staying up late and don't feel like dealing with this right now. It might be selfish, but I remind myself that Pixie Bob has control over the creature. It's just an obstacle. While everyone else focuses on the monster, I quietly walk away, heading toward the camp. On my way, I encounter a few other creatures hidden in the woods. I take care of them as a way to apologize to the class for leaving them behind. When I arrive at camp, Mandalay greets me, glancing behind me and asking where everyone else is. I shrug and explain that I work better alone. She seems surprised that I left them behind, but I reassure her that I dealt with the remaining monsters for them since they were moving slowly. Meanwhile, Kirishima asks where I am, prompting everyone to stop and look around. Mineta dramatically suggests that a monster must have eaten me, but Ida insists that the pro-heroes wouldn't let a student get harmed. Bakugo bluntly states that I left them because they slow me down, and the class falls silent, unsure of what to think. As we walk through the clearing, Mandalay welcomes everyone, surprised by our quick arrival. Bakugo demands to know where I am, and Mandalay questions who he's referring to. Bakugo rolls his eyes, clearly frustrated. Ida chastises him for swearing at a pro-hero, and Bakugo responds with another eye roll. Uraraka asks about my whereabouts, and Mandalay reveals that I arrived a long time ago. Bakugo mutters under his breath, and Mr. Aizawa reminds them that they should be grateful for my efforts in taking out the monsters, which saved them time. Denki is shocked to learn that I handled all those creatures and made it to camp before them. As the class rushes inside, excited for food, I'm left to ponder how I managed to take care of those monsters and still arrive first. Suddenly, I'm jolted awake as someone shoves me off the couch and onto the ground. I rub my eyes and groan, questioning why I was pushed. Katsuki grumbles about my decision to ditch the class, and I roll my eyes, claiming it's not my fault they're slow. Before I know it, I'm back on the floor again. Katsuki points out that while the others may be slow, he doesn't see me playing hero. I laugh dryly, reminding him that we're here to be heroes. He stares at me for a moment before sighing and walking away, leaving me feeling a bit puzzled. I decide to act as if I haven't been gone for 2 months and carry on with my day. The next generation of heroes is here, and I'm not getting up either. I stare at the ceiling, wishing for the days when I could sleep in until noon and stay up until dawn, rather than being forced awake at 4:30 in the morning. I glance over to see Katsuki already up and stretching, and I roll my eyes at his relentless routine. A few minutes later, I hear him complaining about germs in his mouth. I can't deal with him right now, so I roll onto my side, trying to go back to sleep. Suddenly, I hear voices discussing whether I should be left to sleep in. One voice suggests that I deserve it for sleeping in, while another pleads with Mr. Aizawa not to let it happen. A tired voice responds with an offer of an extra hour of sleep for anyone who captures the moment on camera, igniting excitement among the group. You'll wake him. Things quiet down with an occasional giggle here and there. With my eyes closed, I ignore whatever is happening around me. The giggles become more frequent, and I hear footsteps approaching. A drop of water lands on my nose. Katsuki stands over me with a big bucket full of water, ready to dump it. I use my telekinesis to make him lift the bucket behind him, causing the water to splash onto everyone behind him, including himself. I sit up and face the class, pretending not to notice that they are all soaked. Katsuki's face turns red as Aizawa glares at me. He asks me through gritted teeth if I have any idea what time it is. I glance at the clock and reply that it's 6. Aizawa then reminds me that I was supposed to be up by 4. He stares at me and tells me to get up, now. I stretch and smile at the class, asking if I missed anything. Midoriya walks away toward the bathroom, and Bakugo grumbles about wanting to get back at him. Kaminari sighs, mentioning he has to change again. A few others nod in agreement and head toward their bags for dry clothes. Kirishima expresses disbelief at how Midoriya pulled off that trick at the last minute, while Siro shares that he recorded it, noting how Midoriya didn't even flinch. I think back to earlier when the room was filled with the sounds of students screaming during training camp. Midoriya returns a few minutes later in sweatpants and a shirt that humorously says, "T-shirt," on it. He asks me what he missed, and I shrug, saying it was nothing much, a little disappointing actually. He laughs, acknowledging that Ida is upset with him for sleeping in. Just then, Aizawa announces that break time is over, and we all head outside to continue our quirk training. After training, Midoriya grumbles that I'm an annoyance. I smirk a little, watching him walk away, mumbling. Like the rest of the class, I didn't like that he got to sleep in. Mandalay calls out, looking around for Koda after another day of training. The class is too busy arguing over how to start a fire to notice her concern about the missing kid. I offer to look for him, and she gratefully points me toward one of the mountains, explaining that Koda likes to hide there for alone time. As I walk in that direction, I reflect on Koda's behavior. He seems to dislike the class, often glaring at everyone and showing no interest in discussions about quirks or heroes. I find it strange for a kid his age, and the more I think about it, the more connections I make. Mandalay is related to the pro-hero duo known as the Waterhose Heroes, who died protecting citizens from an A-rank villain. I remember hearing about their deaths and that they had a child who was safe with family. I could be wrong about Koda being their child, but it would explain a lot about his attitude. The Waterhose Heroes received praise for their bravery, even though it cost them their lives. As I climb the mountain, I notice small footprints leading to a flat area where Koda stands, looking down at the camp. I comment on how impressive it is that he made it up there so quickly. He jumps and glares at me, asking how I found him. I casually mention following the footprints, leaving out that Mandalay directed me. Koda tells me to go away, insisting it's bad enough that I and the other aspiring heroes are there. I inform him that Mandalay wants him to come down for dinner. It continues to glare at me, and I mention the Waterhose Heroes. His eyes widen before he scowls, accusing me of being told by Mandalay. I clarify that she didn't tell me anything, but I assume they are his parents. Koda snaps at me to shut up and turns back to look at the camp. I tell him that if he gets hungry, they're making curry. As I start to walk away, he calls out that he hates me and my quirk, expressing disdain for all the aspiring heroes training for a foolish dream. I stop and face him, acknowledging that he's right about the world being messed up. It's sad that someone his age understands that, but he will have to accept it. With the power our society possesses, there are bound to be villains and troublemakers. However, there are also those willing to risk their lives to stop them. Losing your parents was unfair, and it's understandable to feel upset with the world. But isolating yourself will only lead to more pain. Koda remained silent, looking down. The speaker expressed a hope that Koda would return at a reasonable hour before turning back toward the camp. When the speaker returned to the camp, Todoroki asked where they had been. The speaker explained that Mandalay had asked them to find Koda and try to convince him to come back. Unfortunately, it hadn't worked. Koda was determined to keep his distance. Todoroki reminded them that Koda would have to come down eventually, as Mr. Aizawa had planned some exercises later, and they should be prepared. The speaker complained about more training, wishing for a break, while Todoroki mentioned that it was supposed to be a fun type of exercise. The speaker lamented that it would take away from their sleep. Once everyone finished eating, it was time to start the activity. Mina excitedly yelled about a test of courage, prompting Aizawa to sigh and announce that the students in the extra lessons group would have to join him for more training. He had to drag Mina, Denki, Siro, Kirishima, and Sada back to the camp while the others watched. The PP Cats explained the rules of the game, which involved a scary maze with Class 1B acting as the scares while Class 1A navigated through, trying not to panic. After Class 1A had all gone through, the classes would switch. The class was split into teams of 2, but due to an odd number of students, one person would be left alone, and that person happened to be the speaker. They felt annoyed until they saw Bakugo's expression when he was paired with Todoroki. As Group 5 was called to enter the maze, the speaker had spent the last few minutes waiting, interrupted only by occasional screams that were starting to become irritating. They noticed black smoke rising from the trees and the smell of something burning. The speaker wondered if someone in Class 1B had a fire quirk, recalling only themselves and Todoroki from the sports festival. There was no way Todoroki would be scared enough to accidentally activate his quirk, especially since the speaker hadn't even entered the woods yet. Suddenly, Pishibob yelled before being pulled toward two figures. Mineta cried out in alarm, realizing that villains were present despite assurances that this wouldn't happen. The speaker quickly scanned the area and noticed one person was missing, feeling a surge of dread. They turned to Mandalay and Tiger, asking if they could handle the villains. Mandalay questioned what the speaker was planning, but the speaker insisted that Koda was missing and they needed to find him. Mandalay shook her head, stating they couldn't let the speaker leave. The speaker retorted that they hadn't asked for permission and would go find Koda if the others could manage on their own. They expressed their frustration with the ongoing conversation and dashed toward Koda's hideout. Mandalay called after the speaker, worried about their safety. Ida reassured her that the speaker knew what they were doing, although he apologized for their tone. Mandalay remained concerned, stating that the speaker was just a teenager running into danger. Ojiro added that the speaker had faced danger before and could handle themselves. Reluctantly, Mandalay nodded and prepared to confront the villains alongside Pishibob. The villains introduced themselves, with one being a lizard-like figure brandishing weapons. The speaker turned to the rest of the students, instructing them to retreat and not engage in battle, designating the class representative to take charge. They quickly ran back to the camp while the speaker broadcasted the situation to the remaining classmates and heroes, trying to reach Koda. Koda heard Mandalay's voice in his head, urging him to find a safe place. He struggled to focus as a cloaked figure approached him, expressing surprise at finding someone not on the list. The figure removed their mask, revealing a grinning face. They commented on Koda's hat and suggested a trade for their mask. Koda's heart raced as he recognized the figure. He cried out in disbelief, and the figure raised their arm. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the area, causing Koda to stumble. He opened his eyes to see the person from the previous day, who checked him for injuries before turning back to face the villain. Koda felt a mix of emotions, recalling everything that had happened. He expressed his frustration, feeling anger towards the situation and the so-called heroes training for their dreams. You're all just going to end up hurting each other anyway, and it's disgusting. Why is he here? Mandalay didn't tell him anything, but he assumes they are my parents. Why does he care so much? Midoriya felt a surge of determination. Thanks to Mandalay and Tiger, he had arrived just in time to prevent something terrible from happening. He clutched his side as a dull ache throbbed there. He hadn't even been hit yet, but the force of the villain's earlier attack had pushed him back. The villain approached, a sinister grin on his face. He recognized Midoriya, stating that he was on the list at the top, if he remembered correctly. Midoriya glanced back at Koda, who was watching with tears streaming down his face. He reassured Koda that everything would be all right, urging him to trust him. Standing tall, he instructed Koda to run as if there were no tomorrow when he said so. Koda sniffled in response. With a surge of telekinesis, Midoriya lifted Koda, who yelped in surprise as he was carried over the villain and to safety on the other side of the cliff. Midoriya shouted for Koda to run, but the boy stood frozen in shock, staring back at him. The villain laughed, mocking Midoriya's efforts. He leaped forward, launching an attack. Midoriya attempted to block the punches, but he could hear the strain in his bones. It felt like he was fighting all might. He blew smoke into the villain's eyes, causing him to stagger back. Taking advantage of the moment, Midoriya gathered rubble with his telekinesis and hurled it at the villain with all his strength. The villain staggered but quickly regained his composure, grinning at Midoriya. In an instant, he was in front of Midoriya, delivering a powerful kick to his stomach. Midoriya stumbled back, falling to the ground, every part of him aching. Frustration bubbled within him as he struggled to rise again, but his body betrayed him, collapsing under its own weight. The villain taunted him, claiming he was weak and not saving anyone. Midoriya pushed through the pain and finally managed to stand upright. He ignited his arms with fire, launching flames at the villain, who dodged with ease. Midoriya focused his telekinesis on a boulder, hurling it at the villain from behind. It struck, but the villain brushed it off as if it were nothing. Midoriya felt blood trickle from his nose as he exerted himself, growing lightheaded. The villain continued to mock him, preparing to strike again when he noticed Koda, who was holding rocks in his hands. Koda yelled for the villain to leave him alone, and Midoriya felt a surge of protectiveness. Regaining his balance, he summoned sparks around him, extinguishing the flames on his arms. Despite the burning sensation in his throat, he unleashed a torrent of fire toward the villain. He lifted the boulder again, dropping it from above, but the villain punched it away and retaliated with a rock that struck Midoriya hard enough to stop his fire quirk. Smoke began to escape from his mouth, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the fallen rocks around him. Blood continued to flow from his nose, but he was determined. He lifted all the boulders with his telekinesis, the sparks around him intensifying as he dropped them with all his might. They struck the villain, who fell to the ground. Midoriya then lifted the villain again and hurled him toward the cave walls. Once the dust settled, the villain remained down. Midoriya stared at him for a moment before his legs gave way, and he fell to his hands and knees. Koda watched as Midoriya coughed up smoke, desperately trying to stop the blood from his nose. He felt like a mess. Tears streamed down his face, pain radiated through his body, and he struggled to breathe. He thought to himself that he was no hero. Looking back at Koda, he attempted to rise when he noticed the villain twitching out of the corner of his eye. No, please no. If that didn't work, there was no way he could defeat this guy. The villain stood up, seemingly unfazed. He commented on the fight, and Midoriya quickly used his telekinesis to pull Koda behind him, realizing the boy had ended up too close to the villain. Koda cried out for Midoriya to stop, urging him to leave. Midoriya snapped back, frustrated that Koda hadn't followed his instructions. He had a plan: get the kid to safety, land a few hits, and then escape. But Koda hadn't followed the plan. The villain challenged Midoriya to a round 2, and the tension in the air thickened as the battle was far from over. She avoided looking at him. He pointed out that he noticed her choice of in turn, making it clear he wasn't oblivious. He continued, expressing his understanding of her desire to avenge her brother, but reminded her that there was little she could do. She whispered about her brother's condition, the fact that he was paralyzed from the waist down and could no longer be a hero. Silence hung between them as she added that it was all his fault. He acknowledged her feelings but insisted that it wasn't her responsibility to teach him a lesson. He reassured her that justice would be served, just not by a 16-year-old. She forced a laugh, recognizing her role as class president and admitting he was right before walking away. Later, she noticed Midoriya approaching and asked if he was heading toward his train. He casually mentioned he planned to walk there and then reminded her not to do anything reckless. She hesitated, unsure how to respond, but he assured her they were friends and that she could talk to him. She smiled and waved goodbye as she made her way to the train. Midoriya was her friend, and while she didn't always agree with his choices, she cared about him, and it was evident he cared about her too. She reflected on their conversation, realizing they were both right. Seeking revenge wasn't the solution. With her head down, she apologized, but Manuel reassured her there was no need for that, understanding where she was coming from. He thanked her for sharing her thoughts about Midoriya and encouraged her to continue patrolling. She knew revenge wasn't the answer, but she struggled with the anger that lingered within her. What else could she do about it? Midoriya contemplated the situation. The villain had been taunting him, and he felt the weight of the confrontation pressing down on him. The villain had made it clear that he was done playing games, and Midoriya could sense the tension in the air. As the villain charged at him with renewed speed, Midoriya quickly lifted himself and Koda out of harm's way. He muttered to himself about the villain's increased speed and glanced toward the camp. Aizawa was there, and Midoriya knew he could cancel the villain's quirk, giving him a chance to strike back. But he hesitated, realizing that leading the villain to Aizawa could put others in danger. Tears of frustration welled up in his eyes as he grappled with the overwhelming odds against him. Midoriya wished for the power of Mirio, imagining how easily he could defeat the villain with one for all. The villain's laughter echoed, mocking him for his apparent cowardice. Midoriya felt a surge of determination and prepared himself for the next attack. He dropped Koda to safety and braced for impact. The ground shook as the villain powered up and leaped toward him. Midoriya took the hit, feeling the force knock him down. Koda urged him to retreat, but Midoriya was resolute, standing up to shield Koda from the villain's view. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Sparks crackled around him as he used his telekinesis to lift the villain off the ground, determined to turn the tide. He released the villain, watching him fall, but the villain landed unscathed, grinning as he charged back. Midoriya shouted for Koda to run, feeling the strain of the battle weighing heavily on him. The villain's quirk was unnervingly similar to All Might's, but with a more intimidating display of muscle. Midoriya struggled to maintain his telekinetic hold as the villain fought against it. His head throbbed, and he realized he had reached his limit. In a desperate attempt, he unleashed blasts of fire toward the villain while trying to hold him back. But the strain became unbearable and he had to stop. Black smoke began to escape from his mouth and nose, and the villain seized the opportunity to break free, pushing Midoriya down. Feeling defeated, Midoriya accepted the blows, his thoughts drifting to the fleeting moments of his life. He had taken so much for granted, believing he could be a hero and help others. Regret washed over him as he thought of his mother, wishing he could apologize for not living up to his potential. Koda, witnessing Midoriya's struggle, felt a surge of panic. He activated his quirk and splashed water at the villain, shouting for him to leave Midoriya alone. The villain laughed, dismissing Koda's efforts, but suddenly the ground began to tremble and the villain was lifted off the ground. A scratchy voice emerged, declaring that the villain would not be allowed to harm Koda. The villain was shocked, realizing he was losing control. Midoriya emerged from the rubble, surrounded by green sparks that made him appear almost radiant. He gasped, declaring that he was ready for round 2. In an instant, the villain was sent crashing into the cave walls, debris falling around him as Midoriya stood tall, ready to finish the fight. As Midoriya fought, he remembered the words of wisdom he had received about sacrifice and heroism. He knew that one day, Koda would understand the true meaning of being a hero and the importance of those who risk their lives to save others.